You are listening to episode 192 of Mitolife Radio. I am Matt Blackburn, and today I'm excited to interview Caitlyn Hartigan. She created a protocol called the Iron Protocol and educates people on iron deficiency with or without anemia. I was under the assumption that iron deficiency was synonymous with anemia, but often they're actually completely different things. So the education that Caitlyn provides and the group provides on Facebook is really invaluable. And I was really floored when I joined that group. There's almost 60,000 members in it as of this podcast. I'm sure after the show posts, that's going to shoot up substantially. But the guide on there is really great if anyone's been told that they are anemic or low in iron or tested low ferritin or low serum iron. A lot of people get confused with the lab tests because everyone says different things. One person that has a financial investment in a protocol is going to convince you that ferritin should be between 0 and 20, and other people like Caitlyn are going to say that is a sure sign that you are 100% without a doubt absolutely iron deficient. And I would agree with that. I've been really diving into the research on iron deficiency the last several months, and it's a definite problem. It definitely exists, and there is a very simple solution and treatment for it. So I'll let Caitlyn explain. Enjoy the show. Here is Caitlyn Hartigan. Okay, Caitlyn Hartigan, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this show, and a lot of the listeners are as well. For some reason, this has become such a heated topic. Just the whole, you wouldn't think from the outside in looking at the topic of iron, if you're not in the natural health world, that it would be just so divisive and just so heated. But there's these really strong debates happening, especially the last few weeks, probably because of me largely, and you've been questioning this for years, like, iron deficiency is a real issue. And there's a lot of practitioners, hundreds, in fact, that are telling iron deficient people to donate blood. And you've told me that's equivalent to a death sentence. So before we get into all that, though, how did you get into this and interested in this whole subject?
The way I got into this was I was just really sick. Even starting in my teens, I was sleeping a lot, sleeping in and having to nap a lot. And I remember my best friend who's around 78 right now. And we used to run around and go to estate sales early in the morning. And she used to tease me and say, "You can sleep when you're dead, Caitlyn." And I'm like, I feel like I'm dying. I mean, she'd run circles around me. So, you kind of think at first that that's what happens to teenagers. Just they're tired. So I didn't think too much about it. And then my health just continued to decline. And I was in my early 20s and seeing doctors and, having to tell them, hey, I'm relying on Red Bull and 5-Hour Energy and coffee. I'm ending up in the minor emergency because that's too hard on my health. Something's wrong. And for 10 years, they told me, oh, your labs are fine. You're normal. So I just wanted to save my own life. And I started exploring everything outside of my doctors because they kept telling me I was fine when clearly I wasn't. I'm like, it's not normal for a 25-year-old to, rely on, sleeping all the time. And I was worried about a roof over my head. Plus I had dreams of my own. So to the point though, how it really started was I was exploring on the internet, everything I needed to vet out and explore. And, I ended up in an adrenal fatigue support group and posting all of my symptoms and asking if, it could possibly be adrenal fatigue. And it took a couple of people on that post in the thread saying, I don't think you have adrenal fatigue, you need to check your ferritin. And that's how this all started. So I was determined to save my own life and figure it out. And thank God for an adrenal fatigue Facebook group. That's how it all started.
That's amazing. Yeah, it seems like you've been mostly on Facebook. I've been mostly on Instagram, and there's like different communities on either of them. And that's really interesting about checking ferritin. Lately, I've been getting more into labs, and there's so many different, there's urine, stool, blood work, and everyone has their own beliefs about those. But I think they're worth but they seem to be worth doing, right?
I'm a big fan of testing everything. I mean, I was told I was fine. And especially as a woman, you want to come off agreeable, especially to a doctor, and it's intimidating as well. And honestly, you're just desperate for help. And finally, after years of it, I might've been around 25, 26. And I finally said, in response to them saying, "Oh, your labs are fine. You're normal." I said, "Well, then do other tests. I mean, because you keep doing the same ones. I mean, and you're saying I'm fine when I'm not fine." And they kept telling me I was fine. And even would say, just make sure to work out and exercise and sleep right and eat well. And then finally, at one point, I was prescribed to go vegan as someone who was severely iron deficient since at least puberty. And they would always ask, how long have these symptoms been going? I'm like, well, I don't remember waking up like a kid like this. I would wake up just dead zombie, not rested. I knew something was wrong. So I'm a big fan of testing everything. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And for my background in regards to understanding iron deficiency and learning from it, not only did I study everything that was available online for free, clinical articles and studies and whatnot, but I vetted it out with people. So it's just amazing what you can tell, comparing labs before and after different treatments, and also amazing what you can tell when you get a mass consensus of results.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because we were talking about that the other day, how there's a kind of an appeal to authority fallacy that's really prevalent now, where people bow to these information gurus, health gurus, because I've been reading studies for 5 hours every day for 10 years. Therefore, I know more than you, bow down to me. And it's like, it's not accurate, because that information, I mean, there's so many layers to it, right? It's like how that individual is interpreting the information you said might be wrong. And
I've come across plenty that have used wrong terminology, which completely changes the message. I've come across plenty that leave out important components that I didn't realize were important at the time of reading it until I studied real life results and mass data. So it's tough. Even people that say, "Hey, I'm really smart. I'm an engineer and I can't understand this. Hey, I'm really smart." I had someone tell me they were in robotics. So anyway, something way over my head. And it's amazing. Even people in the field get different interpretations from different studies and articles as well. Especially studies, they're a bit harder to interpret than an article.
Yeah, I remember you said you went to different groups and you did a bunch of things, but just making little polls and just getting real time data from real people, not just you reading a study and then trying to interpret it correctly and then trying to apply that to people, which is a totally different deal. Is like going to the people directly and saying, "Hey, what are your symptoms? What have you tried?" Right. Well,
and I came to a lot of, at the beginning of my journey of hyper focusing on iron deficiency, I came to a handful of conclusions that were incorrect based on me piecing together logic of within the studies, different studies and articles I would read. And you can really come to erroneous conclusions and just completely incorrect conclusions on your own by doing that. I'm a big advocate for people using their own brains and thinking outside the box as well, and trying to make conclusions and trying to understand things. But I come from a background of analyzing mass data. So, I mean, I was a professional analyst with mass real-time data as well. Not only do I just love that in general, I've kind of done that my whole life, but I was in my profession doing that. But it really is amazing. You can read plenty of things online, and it won't list your symptoms, or it will say it does have X, Y, and Z, and you don't have those. So you think, oh, I guess I don't have that. So, I mean, it is amazing when you compare real life data versus published data. And by all means, some of the studies that we read and reference, they're a study of 12 people or 30 people. I mean, you can get a much larger sample size than that in Facebook groups, in social media. It's mind blowing. That's a whole other podcast too, isn't it? The pros and cons of social media, right?
And then you could cherry pick studies that fit your narrative. Like I've had some really bombshell ceruloplasmin articles. My girlfriend and I, she sends them to me, and then I'm like, wow, like this ceruloplasmin thing has been blown out of proportion to be this god particle, and it's actually just a protein, that has a really important function, but it's not the end all be all to human health.
Not an iron deficiency, at least. But I got excited when you said you and your girlfriend are sending that back and forth, because it really does. Within this journey, I mean, that's a big component of it too, having someone to talk about it with, and go back and forth. That's a large component. And that I see in my group, that's a huge benefit. People vocalize that they have someone to talk to about this, and also brainstorm and learn in different ways. And by all means, when you're sick, when you're really, really ill and trying to learn about this, a lot of my members will try to talk to their spouses about it, and they're busy working all the time, and they just get drained by it. So, and that can feel really defeating. So, I mean, to have somebody, I got excited when you said you both talk about it. Why not? Because that's a whole nother component as well.
Yeah. That's why the group you have so awesome. And so getting back to your story, like, I think I was of the belief, because it's a very, very, very convincing argument, that nobody could be iron deficient because of a bunch of reasons, but one is fortified iron filings in the cereal, and you have the YouTube video of the magnet and crushing up cereal in a blender, holding the magnet up to it, and people say, oh my God, everyone can't be iron deficient because we've been eating iron filings. But what I didn't realize until actually literally 2 or 3 weeks ago is that the phytates in the Honey Nut Cheerios I ate and Lucky Charms I ate and Frosted Flakes blocked iron. And the calcium in the milk that I megadosed blocked iron. Yeah. And probably the parasites I had, or the malabsorption. I mean, tons of the zinc supplement who knows? I mean, I probably had 5-10 things that were blocking iron. And so just because it's in the food doesn't mean we're getting it, right? That's one.
Absolutely. Did you see the list and the guides? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's endless. You can't, and a lot of my group members will say, I'm overwhelmed by this. And it's like, you actually don't have to memorize it. Just take your iron an hour before you eat. You're fine with the vitamin C. You'll be good. But some people are interested in learning. And I mean, that list is endless for what blocks non-heme iron absorption. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So most of what we eat with the non-heme iron is blocking it usually, much of the time, unless you're high vitamin C with it on purpose.
Yeah. And have you looked into the whole, I'm sure you have the iron recycling system, the reticuloendothelial system, and people say all of the iron we need, or most of it, comes from that, 95% of it. And we only need 1 milligram by mouth orally, but we would create a true state of iron deficiency if we only got 1 milligram of iron, like net absorbed iron per day, right?
Yeah, because you're also excreting it. Right. I'm talking out loud right now, the first time in my life, apparently. I mean, you lose iron in sweat. Women lose iron in their menses, and that's a big argument I've seen on social media that, typically women only lose like 3 teaspoons or tablespoons. Well, have you looked at the number of women with heavy periods? Did you know the term heavy periods has a clinical term that I can't pronounce out loud? Kind of, studying all of this makes me think of my fellow millennials may appreciate this. When we all were first reading Harry Potter and we didn't know how to pronounce Hermione, kind kind of like that. And then we heard it out loud for the first time in the movies. Meringue, how do you say that? Meringue, the heavy periods is a clinical term, and there's a specific amount for heavy periods. It's at least 8 milliliters lost in total within your period. So what's interesting, what I realized, hearing all these different influences and opinions on iron, you really can vet every statement out, oh, well, most people don't. So that's what I did. After my full-time job, I did about 5 to 7 hours of research only on iron deficiency, for almost a year before I did more than that. So, everything I would read in an article, in a study, I would go and I would vet out amongst other sources and on social media as well, and ask real life examples. But, any opinions, because a lot of people are so knowledgeable in these groups, and in the adrenal fatigue group, that really changed my life. That was the first time I'd ever seen a large community and people voluntarily sharing research that they found, copying and pasting it and citing it as well, and giving these labors of love. But it was amazing to first be exposed to people sharing information, and you start thinking, wow, they sound really knowledgeable. Okay. And I'm desperate, I'll entertain anything. I'm so sick. And so what I did was, every time somebody would share something as fact, I would go and I would dive in and vet that out. And, when you're unwell, it's just really hard to take care of yourself, and it's really hard to do that. I had God with me. I had determination. So, I'm blessed to have been able to do that. Most people can't, even though I'm a big advocate that everyone can, and there is hope, and you can do this. But the truth is when you're so unwell, it can, turn into being so unwell that it's hard to take care of yourself. So, definitely when that's an important point of sharing information, and, like the 1 milligram, it's like, oh, okay, well, that sounds logical, but you really do need to go vet it out yourself. You do.
Yeah. Yeah. I sent a video to you, and I'm a YouTube lecture, and I'm sure you get stuff all the time. And it was the John Adamson, MD, iron deficiency, more than just anemia. I thought it was a great 40-minute quick lecture there. And it was just a kind of a great overview of it, and kind of a little bit of the complexity of it. And he was saying by far, animal flesh or red meat is the richest source of iron.
Yeah.
And I think back to growing up, like I was kind of vegetarian just because I thought meat was gross. I don't know if it was the, cartoons I watched growing up, and,
but also kids with textures and tastes,
Right.
Yeah. Just being a kid anyway.
Right. I was more like a chicken nugget kid for like 20 years,
A lot of people are.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I love steak, and I love, bison and stuff. But, for the first really 30 years of my life, I didn't eat much red meat at all. And that's kind of scary to think about, because I was like a C, B student. And I remember experiencing so much brain fog and almost failing math class multiple times, and just feeling like my potential was so much more, which is another aspect to fatigue, right? Like when you it's so frustrating because you're like in this box and you're like, okay, I can see
especially
kind
when
of
you're
out.
ambitious. Yeah. Right. And you have dreams and your capabilities, but you're physically blocked, whether it be mentally or physically unable to, but you you can. And then there's the whole emotional component that comes with that, with the many failures that come with that. That was me.
Yeah. Like
really
depression and anxiety too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big deal. And I think just that myth that, only pigeons in this one experiment had true iron deficiency ever on this planet, or the only animals. I think that's kind of a dangerous assumption, especially when people are getting better on iron transfusions and iron supplements, which I'd like to let's just jump into the whole ferritin thing, because that's like the elephant in the room. People say ferritin is only one aspect to it. It's not an accurate marker.
You want me to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Re-roll. Um, so it's been documented throughout many, many different studies and articles that ferritin is the most specific indicator of iron deficiency, with the caveat that it's when the presence of inflammation, fatty liver, anything that could quote unquote falsely elevate it. It's not really falsely, but for the purposes of iron deficiency determination, falsely elevate it. So ferritin can rise when the body has inflammation, fatty liver, hyperthyroidism, any malignancies, obesity. Yeah. So especially when it's under 100, it's more of a useful diagnostic tool for iron deficiency. And mind you, when I'm speaking, I have no clinical background training, I have no medical training. This is just somebody who wanted to save her own life. And sometimes I feel like I had to recreate the wheel when it comes to iron deficiency. But what they did many, many times over, this is something you all can find, anyone can find online in different studies, is their bone marrow staining and bone marrow biopsies of the iron within there. So it's been deemed in the clinical realm that any ferritin under 100 can be an iron deficiency and can cause symptoms, along with a transferrin saturation of less than 20%. So those are possible iron deficiencies. Really, if you have transferrin less than 20%, I think it's an absolute as well. But anyway, and it's been deemed that a ferritin of 30 and below is a clinical absolute iron deficiency. That means you don't have to look anywhere else to know that that body is iron deficient. It doesn't have enough for full body systems. So iron is responsible by tens of enzymes that are required for over 180 biochemical processes. So what happens is when we don't have enough iron, the body starts rationing how it spends that iron. And the ferritin is the storage, the safe storage of iron. It's the iron is bound to the protein ferritin. So it's the safe storage of excess iron. But what seems to be lost or isn't taught for doctors is that the body makes decisions based on how much it has in savings, how much it has in storage. So especially when it's below 30, it's been deemed this is an absolute thing. It doesn't have enough to fully create all of those enzymes and tend to those over 180 biochemical processes.
Mm. What do you say to the people? And I think you sent me this about ferritin, the ferritin test not being accurate because it's an intracellular, it's supposed to be in the cell, but we're measuring it in the serum. Therefore, it's not accurate because we're not looking in the right place. Have you heard that argument?
Yeah, it is intracellular. And when we dive into Googling ferritin and vetting all of this out, you can see it says that you can't get like the absolute ferritin because much of it is stored in the liver. But what is reflected in serum has been proven to be a direct correlation and a mirror image. So it's as accurate as it can. I mean, if you can't get the exact thing, you want something that's reflecting the exact same thing, right? And the thing that convinced me was going into all of the different iron deficiency groups and seeing it myself. Oh my God, everyone is horrible below a 30. And time comes into play, how long someone has been deficient. The longer someone has been deficient, the worse off they are. Concurrent deficiencies, especially if it's a low vitamin D, that makes it way worse and way heavier. Most of us say it feels like a heavy blanket is on us. We can't get up and it's more effort. It's horrible. So even if you fix your iron deficiency, if you have lower vitamin D, it's very hard to feel any benefits from it. That low vitamin D is literally heavy.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the vitamin D because that's what you made me think of when you were saying it's a mirror to the liver, because the 25 OHD test, D3 test usually, that kind of reflects the liver stores of it too, right? It's kind of a similarity there.
I'm not an expert on vitamin D, but it's been extremely relevant because most people with iron deficiency are low in vitamin D and B12 as well. So I don't remember that, but I do know about the storage of vitamin D. When that one's lower, that's just cruel. Especially, it's usually really cool. Now, mind you, the way I'm speaking is in generalities. I've seen a small handful of people say, well, I've had a ferritin of 10 for 18 years and I felt fine. You either have really good genetics or maybe some bad genetics that are managing differently, that are working in your favor, or you don't have as many other deficiencies as well. So it's definitely possible that somebody with low ferritin feels fine. Now, the consensus in my group, because we're all about learning and absorbing, especially from each other and experiences and analyzing, is it's kind of funny because when I allow those posts through that say, oh, I think I feel fine. I don't think I have any symptoms, but by all means, I haven't read the over 50 plus symptoms that there are. Most of my members say, don't make yourself wait for the crash. There's a crash coming. So there are some people that feel fine with a lower ferritin. It has been proven in my group, at least, based on the activity, that there's a high likelihood that there could be a crash coming soon, or a buildup and then also a crash. So there's definitely people, and same with vitamin D. I've seen some people say they feel fine. But usually, especially if the vitamin D is lower than 20, the storage, it's so cruel on the mind. It's so harsh. It's a dark, dark, cruel. And by all means, I'm a big believer that probably just about any nutritional or mineral deficiency will at least cause anxiety, let alone some will cause depression, because your mind needs these minerals and nutrients. But it's a different type of dark with lower vitamin D. It is than the other types of deficiencies like low iron and B12. And low B12, a lot of people even hallucinate. That one's kind of I don't want to say the term crazy. That sounds really insensitive, especially for the topic at hand. But it's a wilder depression and mental challenges. Anyway. But
well,
I don't remember about the reflection. I don't remember that.
I like that you bring up the physical emotional connection, because I think a lot of people with true deficiencies are like gaslighted and then say, just do EFT or just do some emotional work. It's all just trauma. Maybe just chug some ayahuasca and you'll be cured.
Right.
It could be, don't fix your vitamin D deficiency or iron.
Right. And it can be. It's not to invalidate that. It's just, if you ask any doctor the amount of time they spent on nutrition, we have plenty of doctors and medical professionals in my group, and they say all the time, we didn't learn any of this. We didn't learn half of this. We didn't learn any of this. We only spent 1 semester on nutrition. So by all means, it's not to invalidate any trauma that anyone's been through. I've been through trauma myself. I have CPTSD. It's just that deficiencies will exacerbate it and make it so much worse than we have to endure. And there's legitimate suffering, and that comes into play with not only just mental, but how that affects your daily life and how you apply yourself and keeping a roof over your head, let alone enjoying life and your quality of life. So the whole mental and emotional aspect is huge. And everyone in my group, we all agree, wow, especially after people have been there for a week or two, they start realizing things from the guides and the activity. Wow, I've been on antidepressants for 20 years and anti-anxiety medicine for 15 or 20 years. And it's been debilitating, or it impacts my quality of life. It impacts how I interact with my children, and how I am active in my life. And they say it's a mass consensus after analyzing everybody's activity and, articles. Wow. If I would have just had this checked out beforehand, maybe all those different types of antidepressants would have worked better or worked. I had my whole life since I was 17, 18, 19. Oh, you're fine. All your labs are fine. You're just depressed. I'm putting on Lexapro. Oh, well, I've been on that. Okay, well, I'm going to put you on this. Okay, I'm willing. I'll do whatever you want. You're the doctor. You know what you're talking about, So, I went through 10 years of that and it not helping.
Wow. Yeah, it could be both. That's
That's a
the
lot.
issue I see in the natural health community. Something I try to always shed light on and emphasize. It's like, it's not, you know, iron overload and iron deficiency can exist on the same planet, right? And
Yeah.
like people could have trauma and deficiencies and they could both exist simultaneously. It's usually
Right.
not just all emotional trauma or all deficiencies, both. Mhm.
I mean, the body's a complex ecosystem. It's a lot going on.
Mhm.
It's very hard for any just one thing to only and always be going on, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. And
That's,
you brought up genetics too. It's funny, the episode, um, a couple before this, I interviewed a guy that created this like AI algorithm website called Self Decode, where basically analyzes like 83 million SNPs in your genome and will like easily spell out whether you have higher needs of a vitamin or lower needs or whatever. But what's so cool is you can search the gene, whatever it is, and whether it be VDR or an iron gene, and then see how many bad copies you have. And it's, it's all probabilities, nothing's 100% accurate
right.
yet, at least. But
And that's the key
yeah,
to
yeah,
understanding is that let's talk about it's highly likely, highly
right,
probable,
right,
or there's a low probability. It's not,
right.
and that goes for a lot in health.
It's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, because the vitamin D topic, it's like no one's deficient, where I used to be in that camp. But it's like, what about VDR mutations or
Yeah.
DHCR7 mutations, which I have? I'm heterozygous mutation for that. Or the SLC11A2, I highly recommend people look into. I sent that to you, and that's the one that's responsible for DMT1 function for intestinal iron absorption.
Yeah.
And I have like 16 out of 20 bad copies of that. So I want to do a deeper dive with like a geneticist to figure it out. But according to my labs, my symptoms being destroyed after 2 blood donations, I feel like I have, it seems accurate. Like it seems like I haven't been absorbing iron.
So are you saying you felt that after the 2 blood donations?
Yeah. So we can kind of go on a little case study right now. But basically, I was, doing a lot of beef liver, bison liver, elk liver for the last 2 to 3 years. I mean, almost daily, just megadosing copper retinol. That's my whole problem in life. I'm just retinol and copper deficient. That was my religion for the last 2 or 3 years.
Had you tested copper RBC or vitamin A palmitate?
I tested, vitamin A.
Either of that?
Vitamin A came up high, but not like overloaded high. Like my needs are higher based on my genetics. So I
for
think
retinol or for palmitate? Do you know?
it was for retinol. Mm-hmm.
So palmitate's the storage of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll have to test that. Yeah.
Yeah, some labs, I think I used Quest last time, and my vitamin A test came back with retinol and palmitate, and I was able to see that my palmitate was very low.
Wow.
And I mean, if it's anything like iron deficiency, I'm not an expert in vitamin A, but if it's anything like iron deficiency, the body makes decisions based on what it has in storage, just like how we make decisions based on what we have in our savings and what we plan on incoming, our income. So, if all of a sudden we lose everything in our savings, what do? We freak out and we think, okay, how much am I going to have coming in? And we start budgeting. How much am I going to spend on gas? How much am I going to spend on rent? How much am I going to spend on my mortgage? Whatever it may be. And the body does the same thing. So if vitamin A is anything like that, which I don't know, my vitamin A palmitate is undetectable.
That's a really good point. Wow. And since you mentioned that, defining terms, I heard it mentioned by the Adamson guy that ferritin is like your savings, serum iron is like your checking account.
Yeah, that's
what would transferrin be?
I've asked my group about that because we all joke about the brain fog we have. And the thing with iron deficiency is the longer you've had it, the longer it takes to recover. You don't feel better just because you get your number correct. So I was deficient over 15 years. So I'm in my 3rd year of recovery and healing. But that's funny. I'm like, what is it? The bus? And it would be the bus, really. Transferrin's the transporter of iron. So its job is to look for any iron and attach to it, it has a high affinity to toxic iron, to Fe3. And so especially when you're absorbing, the body has different systems where it changes from iron 2 to iron 3 to iron 2 to iron 3. And the transferrin has a high affinity to, I think Fe3 is the toxic one. So that means it's like a magnet searching for it at all times. So whether it be coming from the stomach, whether it be in your tissues, it's scavenging and looking for that at all times. That's its job, to take it, to transport. Transferrin is the transporter, to transport it wherever it needs to go. So if we're looking at ferritin being your savings account, I've always said that iron serum is like your checking, or your debit card. You're always going to make sure you have some sort of money in there to survive that day. That's what the serum is for a lot of what the body has. Any type of test you look at, a lot of the times the serum is going to be normal and it's not going to detect a deficiency. And that's because the body's got different systems in place to make sure you're always trying to be alive, whether you're thriving, whether it's enough, it's trying to actually be alive. So the difference on technically heart beating and being alive versus actually living and feeling well, that is a major difference that's lost on most allopathic doctors. And I'm not slighting them. It's just, that's the difference. Because when we go to them, we're asking, hey, I don't feel well. Oh, well, your tests are fine. Well, it's, especially if they're testing serum and a lot of things, it's not going to tell you anything. So I don't know what transferrin would be. Maybe some other folks would come up with that. Transferrin, it would be the actual wallet. It would be the actual, it would be the PIN code or something like that, trying to transfer some money over. It's the transporter. So, and same thing with the wallet. You can only fit so much in physically. Let's say we're only talking about cash. You can only fit a physical amount of so much change and cash in your wallet. So let's say it's filled with all single dollar bills and a whole bunch of pennies and quarters and whatnot. That doesn't mean you're iron replete. That doesn't mean you have enough to recycle. That doesn't mean, and iron replete is a phrase used, to fix that deficiency. The body holds 3 to 5 grams of iron. It's easily Googleable.
Which doesn't sound like a lot when a lot of supplements are like 20, 30 milligrams, but that's not all being stored. Yeah.
Well, it holds that amount, and then it has a certain amount in recycling. And when, you've lost a bunch, or especially you've lost over time because you're not absorbing, you only have less than the 3 to 5 grams in there. You're not iron replete. So for that phrase, but anyway, I don't know what a transferrin is. The transporter.
The ATM, maybe? No, it's not.
Yeah, maybe it's the physical wallet, whatever. Transporter.
And
transfer the money.
I think we were messaging about iron being like stuck in the tissues. Is that something that you've dove into?
Yeah, especially on the gene topic. I have the hereditary hemochromatosis gene mutations. I'm homozygous, meaning I'm clinically highly likely to iron overload. So you can imagine the emotions I went through of 10 years of trying to find my problem or problems, and finally discovered my ferritin's an 8, and doctors blow it off and say, it's right on the line, you're fine. It's just storage, doesn't do anything. It's just storage, doesn't do anything, which makes sense when you think, oh, it's just storage, so it's not doing anything. But they're remiss because they don't realize that the body makes decisions based on what it has in storage, just like we do. It makes perfect sense, budgeting and rationing. So you can imagine what I went through finally, and missing out on my prime of life, and having a tough time trying to keep a roof over my head and working and going through college and just trying to make it, day to day. And I realized that ferritin is probably my issue. And then months later, I realized I have the gene mutations, saying that the treatment that I need is going to kill me. So I dove into that. I'm not I wouldn't call myself an expert on overload, but I'm highly educated on the topic because I had to figure out I had to weigh out, do I want to die from this or do I want to die from that? What do I want? You know?
Would you say one's more prevalent than the other on planet Earth?
Iron deficiency. Yeah. Well, and this goes into the causes topic that we were talking about earlier. Being a woman, you're highly likely to become iron deficient. Why? Because of the periods. But then there's an argument, oh, you only lose so much. Tell that to a woman that goes through 8 tampons a day. Tell that to a woman who uses a Diva cup, which measures usually, I think, 20 milliliters, and they empty that out 8 times a day, 10 times a day. That's in one day. That's not a week long. And then a lot of these women are suffering from over week long periods, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they're frequent. So I've even seen some women say, don't even open your mouth if it's a guy saying, oh, most women only lose. Well, tell that to the millions of people that have endometriosis, PCOS. How do you pronounce the other one? Adenomyosis? I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. Adeno. But this is all things that you can Google and quantify. There's a number for how many people have heavy periods and how much those periods add up to. And then you can even quantify how much iron is lost in those periods. I mean, this is all math. It's not opinion. It's not secret that can't be tested. It's totally quantifiable and measurable. So when it comes to the iron in the tissues, I have the G mutations. They basically mismanage my iron, and I'm clinically highly likely to overload. And I've had 3 infusions. I've been taking iron for 3 years. And if I end up overloading, and getting cancer from tissue in my iron in my tissues, that's not going to happen for a while. And by all means, I would prefer a higher quality of life where I'm actually able to engage in life instead of having a quality of life of 0. And maybe it lengthened out and I'm just laying there. And the most common thing I hear, and the majority of them in the group are women, most common thing I hear amongst everyone is it feels like I'm dying. And it does. And it's not a dramatic thing. And most of us are gaslit by doctors. And it's just a hysterical woman. I mean, and so they're like, just tell them it's depression, anxiety. I mean, that's things that we're going through lifelong. And meanwhile, then they start learning about iron and start taking iron correctly and safely and sufficiently. And, oh, wow, I'm feeling much better. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just a hysterical woman. But with iron in the tissues, like I said, transferrin's job is to take iron and magnetize it. It's got a high affinity to it. It attracts to it and binds to it and changes it to safe iron. And it's transporting iron safely to where it needs to go. So that's measurable as well on the iron panel. You can look at your total number of transferrin, and you can look at your amount of transferrin currently doing their job bound to iron, transporting it where it needs to go. So when I first got those results of my percentage saturation, that's what I'm referring to as the iron bound to transferrin being transported. When I first got that, I didn't fast before my test because my doctor didn't tell me to, and he said it didn't matter, which is wrong. And it's really important to understand that because it changes how you interpret the results. So my saturation came back at an 89%. And I thought, saturation percentage, that's good. I want 100% absorbed. That's what I thought. It was like absorption or something like that. I was like, I want 100% of my iron absorbed because I'm iron deficient and I need all the help I can get. I'm desperate to feel better. And he kind of chuckled, but he's like, that's not really how it works. But he couldn't explain it. And he goes, I'm going to test you for the hemochromatosis gene mutations. And that's how. And then it came back. I'm homozygous for them. And he came back and diagnosed me incorrectly, misdiagnosed me with overload. So overload, for those that may not know, overload and hemochromatosis are the same things. It's the same word. So if you hear the term overload or unbound toxic iron in tissues, that means overload, which means hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis can happen simply from diet, And over time, that's why men over usually 50 are usually more at risk for overload, because it's a buildup of over time. So all men need to get their ferritin checked and their saturation checked, their iron panel. So now that makes me want to describe the iron panel, but I'll stay on topic for now. But hemochromatosis can happen through diet, or it can happen through the gene mutations that make you more susceptible to developing it. So there's something called hereditary hemochromatosis. So you don't have to have the gene mutations to overload. However, if you have the gene mutations, it makes you clinically highly likely. But if you talk to anyone with overload who is experienced with hemochromatosis and overload, they'll tell you about 90% of those with the gene mutations don't ever develop iron overload. Wow. And I'm a prime case in point. I was deficient for over 15 years, at least, if not my whole childhood. So, that's another thing too, to think about. If the majority of people with clinical predispositions to developing overload don't, what's the likelihood that I have overload? Being somebody else that doesn't have the gene mutations. So you can prevent that. You can monitor your iron panel. And for those listening that aren't familiar with the iron panel, I think the iron panel in Australia is the only one that includes ferritin. There might be a couple of other countries, but in general, the iron panel and ferritin are two different tests. So that's part of the problem as well. Most people with iron deficiency are not getting diagnosed because they don't ever get their ferritin checked, because the doctors don't see the need, because it's just storage in their minds. Right. So the iron panel itself has the iron serum, which is essentially useless unless you know how to utilize the test and prepare for it. It comes with the percentage saturation. It comes with the transferrin and the iron binding capacity. So, if we have unbound iron in our tissues, then that would mean that our fasting percentage saturation would be high at all times. And that's because the transferrin would be constantly at work finding and scavenging and binding to all this toxic iron and transporting it where it needs to go, usually storage, since it's the safe storage, safe place to put it. And there's no natural way to, get rid of it other than sweating, really. So if we did, we'd have that. We'd have high saturation.
Intestinal bleeding though, right? I mean, I've been diving into the whole colon cancer. That's what the Adamson guy said. He said, it's colon cancer until proven otherwise. If especially men have intestinal bleeding. Wow. But hookworm, the book I'm reading, said 700 million people on the planet have hookworm infection. That's a lot of people. That's right. That's a crazy kind of deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ulcers, colitis, Crohn's, IBD.
Yeah.
I mean, women tend to have iron deficiency more, but men could have it just as easily, right?
Yeah. We have just over 4% men in my group, but most men are not as eager and keen to get different testing and jump on a health Facebook group. But anyone can get it, especially if, sorry, Luca wants to be the star. Sorry. Okay. You're a good guard dog. Come back. So anyone can have, some sort of intestinal bleeding, and anyone can have some sort of, something that eats iron. There are different viruses, different bacteria, different parasites. And not all of them eat iron, but a lot of them do. And you can actually vet that out yourself and look up which specific one you have and find, it's amazing. I mean, I can't imagine, in the 50s and, even in the 90s, we weren't able to just Google everything and have everything at our fingertips. This is amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, imagine only doctors could keep this information and we were at at their whim of however they felt like treating him, whatever they felt like saying, which is how it's been historically. But we have the tools now. We have access to a lot of information that we can use. So usually when there isn't an obvious reason for the iron, if the doctor knows how to diagnose iron deficiency, which most don't until it's too late, and I'm not angry. I'm not, I mean, I am angry a bit, but I'm not speaking angrily. I'm not slighting them. I'm speaking technically. Most do not know how to diagnose iron deficiency, and most until it's way too late, until it reaches the anemia stage. And that's another point. But if there isn't an obvious reason for the iron deficiency, it's very common for the diagnosing physician to order referral for a GI to look if there's a bleed or if there's H. pylori, in the stomach anywhere. So that's common, but it's common practice to be referred to a GI because of all of those reasons for iron deficiency, which can often be tended to, which is exciting,
Oh, yeah, I'm curious. I think there's a COVID connection. I mean, there's COVID connection with everything, but like the hepcidin.
COVID eats a lot of your minerals and nutrients.
Right. And I mean, one question I've been having is like, candida and sugar. That's like, people have been talking about that for decades in the natural health community, right? But some podcasts that I've had, some people have made the argument and said, well, when you restrict the food sources of candida, like you just go keto, then it gets angry and gets aggressive, and then it really starts causing more issues. And I wonder if that's the same thing with like this whole concept of like starving the hookworm, or like you said, the viruses, the bacteria. If you just take away, let me take away as much iron as I can from them, but then you suffer. I've just been kind of meditating on that and wondering.
Yeah,
if that's
a common topic within our group that we educate over, that because I have a long list of causes that include all sorts of different bacteria, viruses, parasites, and it's known within my group that some of those can feed on iron. So therefore you're feeding them and growing them. So you may not want to take iron while you have that going on. And COVID's been a big topic because certain viruses feed on iron. And we have found that if you test really soon while having COVID or just having COVID, you often still are suffering from the inflammation. So your ferritin is often sky high or higher. And then if you wait several weeks to months afterwards, whenever your inflammation is down, many people, I don't want to say most because I haven't analyzed the millions of people with COVID. So let's look at where I'm getting my data from. I'm analyzing those with iron deficiency, but many with COVID are experiencing a severe drop in their ferritin. And so we're realizing that it does feed on iron. And so that's a debate. That's a personal debate that we're seeing within my group. Here's the information. It will be feeding it. If you're giving it iron while you have COVID, it will be feeding it. But we're seeing plenty of members say, my iron deficiency is killing me. I can't make it to work. I can't feed my kids. I can't bathe my kids. My husband's resenting me. I'm losing my life. And I can't afford to not take this iron. And so we're actually seeing a handful of members say, I'm on the iron right now, or I took the iron during COVID. I got over it fine. And I wouldn't recommend staying off the iron. So we, reiterate within there, it's a personal choice. Like, here's the information, do what you will with it. There's a chance, you'll be fine with taking the iron with COVID. There's a chance, we do know it feeds on it. So it's really just a personal choice, but it is interesting. There are plenty of viruses and bacteria that feed on iron.
Yeah. I mean, my mentality, you need energy to heal, right? And to fight stuff. That's my mentality.
You need the energy to heal. You need your immune system to heal. So we're seeing that, and there's all sorts of studies on different parasites and viruses that, I think that I know one of them I read, a village in Africa, they were either anemic or they weren't, but they were iron deficient and they had fewer cases of malaria, because it didn't have the iron to feed on. So it's a benefit in that regard. But if you're not worried about malaria, it's a personal choice. Do you want to be living? And is the iron deficiency affecting you so strongly?
Right.
Do you want to be treating it or not? There's pros and cons to everything with the body. It's an ecosystem, and so many things are going on that we don't know are going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reading Robert Crichton was saying in his book that cytokines cause or can cause low serum iron and low transferrin saturation. So like it seems like it can go both ways with inflammation and infection, where it could either push down the numbers to deficiency or push them up, right?
Well, with the inflammation, what usually happens is the hepcidin rises. That's our body's natural defense to absorbing too much iron. So we start at around 0 in the morning or middle of the night morning. And as the day goes on, we increase our production of hepcidin or expression of hepcidin, which blocks iron. So what happens with inflammation is that the hepcidin skyrockets and the body sequesters all the iron it has and puts it into storage, which is the ferritin, which is why you see the sky high ferritin. So being that, if it's really sequestering almost all of your iron, which would make inflammation much, much worse. A lot of people with inflammation find that they don't have inflammation after they supplement with iron. In my group, they're saying my joints are much better, this and that. And then some of them are saying it's worse now that I'm supplementing with iron. It's probably because they're depleting another cofactor. Like I said, the body's an ecosystem. Some things are going on that we don't even know are going on. But so often you'll find the iron serum and the transferrin saturation low only because it's sequestered everything into the ferritin.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is it. I've been saying hepcidin. Is it hepcidin? Is that how you?
Who knows? Like we had one time a big aha, a funny moment in our group. People were like, "How do you pronounce heme?" Heme. I say, I'm from the UK. I say heme, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's like hemoglobin. And then we realized my mod says hemoglobin. I'll never let her live that down. That was really good. But for those that may not know, because I mentioned non-heme right away, but there is a difference between heme and non-heme. So iron has 2 different kinds. There we go. That'll be a good segue to make sure since we're talking about it, I want to make sure people know what we're saying and how to register that. So iron has 2 different kinds of iron. There's heme, which means it's coming from an animal. It can't be replicated. It's coming from an animal, like the bison, like organ meats, whatever it may be. Heme, coming from an animal. Non-heme, it's not coming from an animal. So it's coming from plants, it's artificial. That's what it means. Heme, non-heme. And you can think of heme, if you want, you can think of, like I was just referring to, hemoglobin, if you feel like it, that makes you think of something bio. Heme is from an animal. The absorption rate is completely different. So with heme iron, it's been recorded and discovered that it's around 35 to 45% absorption rate. So if you're eating a steak and it's got 20 milligrams of iron in it, you're typically only going to absorb 35 to 45% of that. It's got a different absorption set of mechanisms than non-heme. Non-heme iron, you will absorb anywhere from 1 to 15%. So if you're eating cereal that says it's a great source of iron and it's really got, how much do you said your Cheerios have? How much do those have? 9 milligrams, 8 milligrams, something like that. Let's say it has 15. Let's say it's some pumped up one. You're really only going to absorb 1 to 15% of that, especially that big difference, 1 to 15%, is especially because so many things block non-heme iron. So with heme iron, the only thing that's been recorded, and it's not as well discovered, it's not as heavily studied as the non-heme iron, so we're still learning so much about it, but the only thing that's been recorded, and also what's nice is in my group, the only thing that we've seen as well, it's matching what we're reading. The only thing that's really blocking the heme iron, the animal iron, is calcium, heavy calcium. And it's up to a certain amount of calcium. You can look in all sorts of different references and Google that. I think some say 150 milligrams of calcium and some say 300 milligrams of calcium. So that's only one for heme, so far as we know. And so far in my group, consistency wise, that's all we can tell. With non-heme, the list is really endless. And I do have the list up there in my guides. It's endless. Like you said, phytates, oxalates, zinc, magnesium, manganese, calcium. So, the milk you're eating your cereal with, I mean, it's blocking the majority of the iron. So it's actually very hard to absorb a lot of the non-heme iron. So that's why in the iron protocol, we educate for optimal absorption. You take your non-heme, if you're taking non-heme iron or eating non-heme iron, if you want to go, a diet based, for optimal absorption, you take your non-heme iron with high dose vitamin C or lysine. And the high dose, when I'm referring to high dose vitamin C, we say at least 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. And that's for a reason. You can absorb much more iron with just 250 milligrams of vitamin C, even just 500. But we have seen a significant difference of lifetime of difference with 1,000 milligrams or more of vitamin C. And what that does is, if you Google it and you go down the rabbit hole, you'll see that high dose vitamin C or vitamin C decreases hepcidin expression. So it decreases what blocks naturally in our bodies the iron absorption, and massively increases absorption. And we've seen arguments, well, hey, I'm confused about this because this research paper says you can only absorb up to 250 milligrams of vitamin C at a time, and the body, just pees out the rest, and it's useless. And, that actually could be a waste of money in supplements. Okay, well, we're letting you know what we've seen is a big difference in gains, monthly gains of raising your ferritin, of 250 milligrams of vitamin C versus 1,000 or more. So we tell people, if you want to test it out on yourself, go ahead. This is just information for you to be most informed. If you want to start smaller and work that's all up to you. So, and there are different forms of vitamin C as well, and we go over that too. But that's it's interesting with the extreme difference in bioavailability or absorption. It's very interesting, and what can block or benefit and help it absorb. It's a major difference, and a big reason why a lot of people are also deficient. And we have a lot of vegetarians and vegans in my group, and they'll say, do I need to start eating meat? We let them know, no, most people who are iron deficient are meat eaters. So think about that as well. Most of them are meat eaters. You don't have to start eating meat, but there are plenty of benefits from it. If you want to learn about it, here's information on it. But
you mentioned lysine too. I haven't heard that one. Is there benefit to absorption to take vitamin C and lysine, or is it an or thing?
Either or both is fine. We've seen both work. And it's a lot of it has to do also with the stomach acidity, needing a more acidic environment for the absorption to be most optimal. So it could have, I don't know the specific mechanisms to the lysine. It might decrease hepcidin expression as well, or it might just make it more acidic. I'm not sure, but lysine as well. People don't like to take vitamin C for a number of different reasons. And we go over those as well in the group too, but lysine's an alternative.
Interesting. Yes. Where do I want to go after this? It was a
lot of places. There's a lot of places we can go.
Right. Yeah. It's something I want to say. Hepcidin, since we've been talking about that a lot. Yeah. Did you know? So I've been there's actually some great YouTube lectures. I love finding good YouTube lectures. And this was like a university lecture tailored to athletes with iron deficiency.
Yeah.
And she was saying that, she was saying hepcidin is increased during intense exercise, which means she was saying basically if athletes exercise really heavily, well, they don't absorb as much of the iron if they take it after or eat a steak or whatever.
Right. Maybe it's from the inflammation from the working out, which puts up the hepcidin flag blocker. Maybe that's what it is. I now that you're saying that, I have come across that. And I didn't really dive in. It was somebody brought it up in my group, and it's a good one. Yeah. I do remember bringing that up.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you too, one of the listeners said that delayed cord clamping, like the umbilical cord after birth.
Oh,
I guess that's a big cause. I mean, her theory, and I don't know how much research is behind this, but that that a lot of people are iron deficient at birth because they, it's a business in the hospital, and so the doctors just want to kick the mom out and get to the next one, and it's like a money making thing, and
right.
so that's why they clamp the cord fast. When I think within somebody's 30 seconds or something insane, when some moms let it stay for like 30 minutes, ideal, or 35 minutes. I've heard
Wow.
different things. And I guess there's tons of blood in that umbilical cord that
Yeah.
transfers iron to the newborn baby. So
Right.
that's there's like a million aspects as to why
Yeah.
men and women could be iron deficient, right? That's just like one of
Well,
them.
well, I haven't delved into that. My mod will be really excited about that one if she hasn't come across that already. But what I do know is that if the mother is iron deficient, it often leads to the baby being iron deficient, and sometimes even complications and issues, especially if the mother is iron deficient within the first trimester, is what I've read. Um, and we've seen a lot of people in the group say that they've been iron deficient their whole life and they're realizing it's because of their mom. And there's a common misconception. It can happen, but it's said commonly, and it is a misconception. Most of the time, a lot of people will say, oh, iron deficiency just runs in my family. Yes, it can happen. There are some genes for that. It can. But what's more likely is because they're all women. And,
Mm, yeah.
and they never healed and became iron replete after having the babies. And so it's getting worse, and the iron deficiency is getting worse with each pregnancy. And maybe even eating habits and different exposures to different causes as well. But what's so common and you can count on happening is most of the time is it's a woman, and it's the whole birth thing. So you can actually look at how much iron is required for a baby, because iron is required for growth and development. So they have to have iron. So they're taking it all from the mom to grow, especially within the first 3 months. And you can fix a deficiency after that too. And we've had a lot of women pregnant on the iron protocol and have successful babies, successful health-wise, babies. But it's interesting. There are articles that go over, you're more at risk, or the baby's also more at risk if it's not dealt with within the first trimester. So that's interesting as well. It can happen, but that's especially when the baby's taking a lot of the iron is when they're growing in the belly. So I don't know how much would continue to pass on through the umbilical cord. This is Lila. This is my best. Sorry. So that's interesting. It's all interesting. All new concept.
And I kind of want to differentiate between, like you said, late stage iron deficiency is an anemia stage.
Yeah.
And so, like in my recent test, my hemoglobin was normal, but I was iron deficient for my other markers. And so that's kind of like mild or early stage, whereas anemia is you have low hemoglobin too, right?
So anemia, if you Google it and you look up the term anemia, it means insufficient red blood cells. And so when you get your CBC or complete blood count test back, the top half is usually all RBC markers, red blood cell markers, which includes hemoglobin, the size and width of red blood cells, and also the number of red blood cells. So all your red blood cell markers are at the top half usually of the complete blood count test, which is usually standard testing. Usually everyone has that done. So if any of those markers are off, indicating an insufficient amount of red blood cells or utilization of red blood cells too, that means anemia. And anemia has tons of causes. I've heard someone even say it's got over 300 causes. You've heard of sickle cell anemia. You've heard of all sorts of different anemias. Now, the bone marrow is what creates the red blood cells. And the bone marrow has different fuelers and a different amount of fuels it takes. And the largest fuel it requires is iron. There's also B12, folate, and B6, amongst other ones, I'm sure. So that's why iron deficiency anemia is so common. It's because women in general are at high risk. children are at high risk for iron deficiency because they're growing. They're needing that iron for growth and development. And a significant portion are iron deficient from birth from the mom. So because iron deficiency is just so highly likely in general, and it's the largest fueler to the bone marrow to create new red blood cells, that's why it's such a common, the top common cause of iron deficiency. And by all means, in America alone, it's over 10 million people that have iron deficiency anemia. That's horrible. It's easily treatable for the majority of causes of iron deficiency. So when we were talking about the body making decisions based on what it has in storage, the body is also really cool and has, it prioritizes. It's got a system of thinking and prioritizing of where to ration out and send this iron. And what's really cool about it is it purposely prioritizes the most critical need for the iron, which is the bone marrow to create new red blood cells. So it's always going to prioritize sending iron there versus something non-critical like hair, skin, nails. So what's funny is some of my guys in the group say, yeah, I started learning this because I was balding. And I'm like, go you, because a lot of people just don't dive into, and male pattern balding is kind of an expected and normal thing anyway. I'm like, that is so cool that's what started your diving into this. I love that. So, the body will, some articles I've even read say that it pulls iron from the hair. It pulls it out of the hair too, and nails and whatnot, and skin. When we're not ingesting enough or absorbing enough to be able to put iron through the bone marrow. So it's amazing. It's getting it from places, it's just amazing. I didn't think science was cool and biology was cool in grade school. I didn't. I was filled with brain fog anyway, but they didn't tell me like, this is just so applicable. And especially as a young woman, wanting to always look nice and have a good amount of hair and whatnot, or a guy wanting a good head of hair. If they would have phrased it that way, I probably would have paid attention more or tried to. But so with anemia and iron deficiency anemia, iron deficiency anemia doesn't happen until all of those, remember I said over 180 different biochemical processes are rationed out, and some of them are even essentially shut down. They're not sending iron there anymore. We had one woman in our group share on her forearm, she had all these lesions, and she posted the photo and she said, all I'm doing is the iron and the vitamin C. And I had normally taken vitamin C, we all know vitamin C helps wound healing, but I think she was taking the heme iron, so she wasn't taking the vitamin C. But she was sharing, these lesions are randomly healing. So it's needed in your skin. So we've learned a lot just from members' experiences, but the key thing that needs to be one of the biggest takeaways for medical professionals and civilians is that anemia and iron deficiency are two completely different things. They're not synonymous. They're not interchangeable. So if somebody is saying the term anemia when they're meaning iron deficiency, that's not a good sign. That's a red flag. That's, whoa, hold up. Because you have to be very meticulous and impeccable with your word. You have to be, because it changes the connections you make and decisions you make and understanding of all of this. So anemia and iron deficiency are not the same thing. Anemia is insufficient red blood cells. Not enough, too small, maybe even too wide. Low hemoglobin, insufficient red blood cells caused by many, many, many things, including iron deficiency. Iron deficiency, the most specific indicator of iron deficiency is a ferritin of 30 and below. That's when your storage is depleted. And you think about it, if you're working and you're having to rely on your savings to make ends meet, your savings is depleting. That's a good status marker, a good gauge of, oh my gosh, I used to have, $10,000 in my savings. And it's 8 months later, and I know I've been taking a lot of those savings, and now I only have $500. We're having a deficiency here in my income. or I'm spending too much somewhere. That's a good gauge. Same thing with ferritin. If your ferritin was in the 200s, last year, and you didn't have any inflammation, anything that would, for lack of a better term, falsely elevate it, and you're now at a 50, your body has been rationing out and starving where it's sending that iron. It's not creating all of those 180 biochemical processes, especially as frequently. So even if it's from 250 to 100, you could be experiencing different iron deficiency symptoms because what your body's doing from the drop. Is that part? I mean,
yeah, because that's one thing I wanted to dive into the testing, because I think that's going to be one of the most common, post-interview questions, as people are going to ask, well, how do I find someone that's going to interpret my iron panel correctly when there's all these factors?
Let me prepare you. This is so hard. It's hard to find whether it be a naturopath, a functional, a wellness coach, anyone. We have not found one particular field or profession who knows this inside and out like you would hope. Hematology. So that's what the guides are for, because we had to collate all of this information and resources myself, because we couldn't find them anywhere else. Even with all of my Googling, I couldn't find them in a collective array to even make sense of it all. So the calculations, even within the guides, are from the American Society of Hematology. But hematologists say, hey, I'm a blood disorder and cancer doctor. I don't care about nutritional deficiency. So, it took me a while to even grasp that. That's not their specialty.
With the variables involved, like chronic inflammation, because some people would hear this interview and say, well, how do you ever get an accurate reading of an iron panel with true numbers if most people are inflamed because of chronic deficiencies of various things? How do you?
I don't know if I would personally, by the way, for anyone caring for my input from my assessment of my group, I don't know if I would say that most people are inflamed, at least to the extent of it affecting ferritin, because you've got your CRP and sed rate as well. I think there's some other inflammation markers, but those are the two top common ones. And we've seen those be high, indicating inflammation, and their ferritin still be low, and it's not affecting ferritin, and vice versa. Oh, as well. Okay, we see it doesn't always reflect.
Yeah, no, I'm going to be an excellent test, and I'll be transparent on my show about it, because I'm just really interested in getting tons of blood work done now. I love it. Fascinating.
Yeah,
so
it's fascinating.
So you mentioned HS, so highly sensitive C-reactive protein. It's an inflammatory marker associated with like cardiovascular disease and stuff. Basically, mine has been 10, which is very high, since 2016. I just remeasured a couple weeks ago, still 10. I think it was cavity. So I actually had dental work done. I think I had cavities for since that time, because I was vegan. So I basically wasn't getting fat soluble vitamins for 10 years. I was vegetarian for a long time.
I was going to say, wasn't your vitamin D lower?
Vitamin D was low.
Super common with cavities.
Yeah. So I bowed down to fillings.
I didn't know until it affected me.
Wasn't root canals.
Come to find out.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a big deal. I mean, there's, all the meridians and stuff.
Vitamins.
Yeah, I think that was creating chronic inflammation in my gums. And they said my gum and my teeth were, the bone and the gums were receding, probably in my whole mouth.
Yeah. So. Isn't that amazing that you can, a lot of us women, since my group is mainly women, even though everyone's welcome, but a lot of us will notice and go and buy different products or complain to the doctor about different things. Hey, I think my gums are receding. Hey, my nails are shredding. My hair is falling out a lot more. That just happens. Hey, my periods are really, really heavy. Some women just have heavier periods. And most of the time it's really, there are plenty of practitioners that know better, but it's not the majority and it's not consistent. So thank goodness for Google, even though I don't recommend anyone going down a Google rabbit hole and freaking themselves out. But it's just, we're so blessed to be in a day and age that we have possible answers at our fingertips. But it is amazing. These little, those in the dental industry obviously know that receding gums is an indicator of health. And that something's going on, obviously. But that's a very important point too. These little things that we may not realize are signs can and often are signs, can be and often are signs.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I sell vitamin K2. And sometimes, I have all the tools and more available. I was swishing with ozonated water. I have lasers and I was megadosing vitamin K2 and none of it was enough. I had to get a procedure done to fix the problem, the root of the problem. So that's another important point too. But yeah, I mean, basically it's been 10 and I was going to say that, in that same test, my serum iron and my saturation was low. My saturation was actually 12.
Yes, your saturation scared me.
Right.
Alarms. That's not a good saturation at all. That's horrible. That's indicative of
thought that means I just have to go and donate blood again.
No, please don't. Unless you need the blood, unless you're trying to line yourself up to need the blood later. Yeah. Or spend money on an infusion. Yeah. Please don't hurt yourself.
Well, that's something I wanted to talk about. I mean, so many segues here, but I'll wrap it together. But so earlier in the show, I was basically saying copper and retinol the last 2 to 3 years. I only started donating blood the first time in my entire life. I gave my first pint this year. I felt like Superman. I felt amazing. I felt less EMF sensitive. But then I got another one, 2 months, 2.5 months later, which was pretty soon. But if I had, according to some figures, 15,000 milligrams of iron stored in my tissues, I should have had way enough to give. And so I went and donated again and I felt destroyed and I haven't felt the same since. And I mean, after that test, that's the 12% saturation and ferritin 68 as of a few weeks ago. Serum iron's 35. So everything's kind of...
So the iron panel, which is iron serum, saturation, transferrin, TIBC, the iron panel reflects what's actively going on in your body. And as I stated earlier, it seems that much of the time, the body's always trying to at least be alive and operate. And that's usually reflected in serum for a lot of different nutritional markers. So the iron panel, it is, and the iron panel doesn't include ferritin. Usually you have to specifically ask for a ferritin test. And a lot of times doctors will fight you on it and say, you don't need it. It's just storage. Most of the time, the iron panel is going to be in normal range because the body is going to even be pulling iron from the hair, pulling iron anywhere to try to use it to be alive. So it's an active reflection. So if you eat some food that has iron and you're absorbing it, your iron serum is going to go up. It's like putting cash in your wallet. Okay, so now what does my wallet say? Well, you just put cash in. So it's going to say you have more cash. It's actually that simple.
What's interesting is the day I got this test, I didn't eat a steak or anything. I was fasted for most of the day.
Which is another reason why it's lower. Right. So if you fast, it's going to be lower. What you want is if you're fasting, you still want it to be within normal range. You don't want it to be completely lower. That's scary. That means your body's struggling. It's having a hard time fully operating because it doesn't have what it needs. Iron's an essential trace mineral, essential trace element. I mean, it's needed. So if you have a lower iron serum fasting, that's like alert, that's way far gone. Like usually that's preventable. Usually if your iron panel is anywhere in the red, low, and TIBC is often high, it's an inverted, it means your capacity to hold iron. So if it's high, that means, you're iron deficient.
Yeah,
so
it was 297 in that one. So that's like,
it might be middle. So a lot of times it's middle too. But if your iron panel is low for iron serum and transferrin, or you're at the anemia stage, that means you're already well into a deficiency. And most of the time it could have been totally prevented. So that makes you think about it a totally different way. That's scary. So low transferrin percentage saturation, it's T percentage saturation, transferrin saturation. As a reminder, transferrin is the transporter. Transferrin saturation means what's the percentage of transporters currently occupied doing their job. So if you've got 400 transferrin as your result, well, okay, but what's really important is how much you're at work right now. doing their job, transporting iron and also scavenging for iron. Wow, only 12% out of 100%. That's scary. So that usually means you just simply don't have enough iron, especially in your tissues, let alone incoming and absorbing. But it can also mean what we've especially discovered in our group is vitamin D and B12 put iron to work. They are, they're the same fuels for many, many biochemical processes. So kind of how I was talking about the bone marrow, having different fuels, and different amounts of needs per fuel. Vitamin D and B12 are common fuelers for a lot of different processes. So what we have found is when people are taking B12 shots or treating a vitamin D deficiency, a lot of times the transferrin saturation increases because the iron is being put to work. It's being, some process is being fueled, and it also requires iron for the fuel too. So it's being put to work. So that low transferrin saturation could also indicate low B12 and low vitamin D, and perhaps they're cofactors. Awesome.
Yeah, my B12 was actually high. It was around 1,000.
Were you supplementing at the time?
No.
Or taking anything?
I mean, I think B12 might have been in a few like multi B complexes.
So usually I take falsely elevated, and you have to be off of any B12 supplementing, even energy drinks, for 4 months.
Oh, interesting.
Or if you're not supplementing and it's high, which isn't bad. You want a higher B12, and by all means, this is coming from somebody who's not medically trained. This isn't medical advice. This is the layman's person just trying to save your life and sharing an analysis. That's all. So take it for what it is. This just sharing an analysis. What it can also be from is from lower folate and the B12 pooling and not being put to use by the folate.
Oh, interesting.
Here we go with the fuelers again. Different nutrients and minerals put each other to work because they're required in the same biochemical process.
That's what I love, all the interactions. That's really cool. Yeah, my folate was 16.
Overwhelming at first.
Right.
But just focus on one thing at a time and we'll be good.
Right.
Good.
I'm going to get retested on the vitamin D because that and the ascorbic acid I really dove into this year. And what's interesting is I was experimenting with ergocalciferol, which is D2, which is the one that doctors commonly prescribe, just to see how I felt. And then I was experimenting with D3, and this test didn't specify whether it was looking at D2, D3, or sometimes a combination of both. So I might have gotten a false high is what I'm saying. So I have to retest because it was
the D. Yeah, if it's a false high, it's from the active D, vitamin D.
Okay.
But because you want to look at storage of vitamin D. But there's something you had just mentioned right before then, the vitamin D.
Is it D2, D3?
Yeah, the D2. Most people will increase their vitamin D storage on the bolus dosing that the doctors typically prescribe of 50,000 IUs of D2 a week. When you dive into vitamin D protocols and you dive into these enthusiasts who are like me, where they have spent overtime for years analyzing articles and studies and real life events, most vitamin D enthusiasts and protocols will go over how it's not the ideal vitamin D for the body's way of utilizing it. And also the bolus dosing isn't as effective as the daily intake. So it's just interesting that, we have these resources now, and we can, I was visiting my grandmother on her deathbed last summer, and I'm like, I don't know anything about cancer, and I don't know everything about everything, but I sure as hell know more than any doctor I've ever met on iron deficiency. And I've had to learn a lot about vitamin D and B12 as well, and their cofactors. And I certainly don't proclaim to know everything about them, but I've had to know a lot, and especially the foundational points about it. I said, so the least I can do is check her RBCs and check her ferritin. I was assuming it would be sky high from inflammation from cancer. And then check her vitamin D, because I know you need vitamin D for the immune system, and her B12 as well. And she wasn't keeping anything down, so I figured her water-soluble vitamins were gone. And her vitamin D was a 20, and my grandmother's the same. Not to be punny now that she's now passed, but my grandmother's just the sweetest thing. And I'm like, I don't understand how she was in such positive spirits at such a low vitamin D number, because it is typically so cruel for most people. Some people are fine with it lower. I've come across them. But I said to the hematologist, I said, is there any way we can get her a bag of B vitamins, considering she can't keep anything down and they're lower? And can we do something about her vitamin D? He said, I mean, usually allopathic doctors don't fight you on it anyway. And so he did. He tried fighting a bit at first. And then he goes, yeah, we'll raise the vitamin D. And I said, okay, good. Because I know that's really needed for immune system. And I know that's just way too low, whether or not you get it to an arguably optimal number, whatever. And he said, well, I don't know if there's anything out there that says she's going to feel better at a higher vitamin D. And I'm like, there is. There's a lot of things that say that. And there's a lot of communities that are sampling pools of a focus group. That's what a lot of these Facebook groups are. It's amazing the information you can take and you can analyze from this. So I could not believe it. He said something and it was dumbfounding me. And I cannot believe I had the gall to say to him, I said, that's horrible, because you can't, it is. He goes, I don't know if there's anything out there that says that. I go, yes. It's just not their forte. They're not educated over this. So this is something that everyone should be, considering and really checking, because it's not monitored like you think it is. So
you bring up an interesting point with like the lab values, because
the whole nother 3 hours. Yeah.
It seems like some protocols, make their own lab values, and maybe ferritin ideally is 0 to 20, which is a reality for one protocol. And then, and then you have like the mainstream where you just Google, and I guess different tests you get, like I used, there's requested tests, but then there's like inside tracker, which is right. But what's like the books I've been reading on, let's just say vitamin D, since we've been talking about that, and this is kind of on the same topic as iron and ferritin. Like some books I've been reading say that some people with genetics or a million factors, literally, that maybe they need a vitamin D level of 200 or 250 or 300, depending on where it is in relationship with PTH and active D, and always about relationships, right? But same thing with ferritin, that my ferritin that was at a 68, and I was so fatigued a couple weeks ago that I could barely lift a weight at all.
Right.
That says something, that not only is it below 100, but for me, with barely being able to lift weights, that is a sign,
right.
Where I don't really
can't ignore when you know your body. You're like, wait a minute, this isn't normal. But now, by all means. And there's so many different things going on in the body. Somebody could feel totally optimal at a ferritin of 68. So I want everyone to hear that I'm not saying a concrete for everyone at all. Some people feel optimal, especially if you have overloaded before. Most people in maintenance with overload, who've had all their phlebotomies or their chelation or chelation therapy, they feel better with the ferritin from anywhere from 30 to 50. So that's possible too. But, there's a totally different concept, and I'll get back to the vitamin D, but on this note, there's a totally different concept of kind of like in maintenance or during recovery. And that's something that a lot of people who don't focus on iron deficiency don't know about. And that's a whole nother topic as well, of just considering your source. If you have not only focused on iron deficiency, and it's very, very hard to know that there's a completely different set of optimal range for healing from iron deficiency versus after you've healed from iron deficiency and you can get lower. So that's a totally different thing as well. And now with the lab ranges, a lot of people don't realize. I learned this because I was like, wait a minute. And I was just deep diving into everything. I had the luxury of, I'm not married. I don't have kids. I have apparently some naughty dogs right now. But for years I had one. And I had the luxury of, after work, just being able to focus on saving my own life. And I was able to go down these rabbit holes and vet things out and confirm 10 times over through real life experiences and whatnot. Now, one time I was reading my recent lab results, and I scrolled down, and it said this lab assay, this range was created by taking a sampling pool of 4,000 people removing the outliers and taking one standard deviation from the mean. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, so it's a glorified averaging with outliers taken out. I don't want to know that range. I want to know what's not symptomatic at all. And I want to know what is completely fueling my body so that it is not having to compensate in different ways for a lack of fuel or a lack of what it needs. I don't want my body being put through stress because it's not getting what it needs, the nutrients or minerals. Like, I don't want to know what a glorified averaging is of a 4,000 person sampling pool or 3,000 or 10,000. It changes geographically, regionally. I mean, it's eating habits in different cultures, things like that. Materials and ingredients and exposure to those. I mean, and daily uses culture wise. I mean, it changes regionally. I don't want to know just what a glorified averaging is. And most of us don't know that. Most of us don't know that's what our lab ranges represent. Most of us are thinking, this is what science has deemed to be the healthy range. This is the range I'm supposed to be at. That's a huge learning curve right there. That is like, if anybody could fast forward to anything within this entire podcast, and especially if they're overwhelmed and if they're new to this realm, I mean, just that alone is one of the biggest things we all need to realize, especially at the beginning of this health accountability journey. Mm-hmm. I mean, that there's how to even interpret lab ranges. So when it comes to, I think Quest and LabCorp, one of them tops out for vitamin D storage, tops out at 60, and the other one tops out at 100. Well, I'm homozygous for VDR TAC. And then you've got some people that say, well, just because you have the genes doesn't mean it's expressing. Okay, thank you. But what if I have all the symptoms that it is expressing? Now, what are you going to, I mean, don't argue with me unless you're going to ask questions and have a conversation about it first. Does that make sense?
Well, like, yeah, I had a doctor in my show. I had a doctor, my friend Tyler, on the show, and he, what's that?
Don't dismiss it, is my point.
Right. No, sorry. I didn't. Yeah.
No,
absolutely.
The Matt Blackburn podcast. What? Going on?
No, I'm glad you said the VDR attack, because he had the deal, basically the inability to make vitamin D from sunlight. That's and he posted his 25D in the middle of summer. He was tan on the beach, and he said it was low middle of summer. And some people think, how's that possible? You never need to supplement.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. You can't say no one ever needs to supplement this because you can raise vitamin D by the sun. Well, has it occurred to you that maybe some people can't raise it by the sun? And I don't mean to sound so condescending. I don't mean to come off like some angry woman or anything like that. So I kind of want to retract that in a way. What I mean is that, we're all human and we're fully flawed and we're going to make errors in judgment. We're going to make leaps in judgment and connections. But the thing is when you are talking about someone else's health, you have to be very specific and you have to be very impeccable with your word, because you might put them in harm's way with your words, especially if you sound like you know what you're talking about. Because some unwell people, they just latch onto that. They're like, well, this person, they sounded, I didn't look at their credentials. I didn't look at their experience. I don't have credentials in medicine and health. But I have over 4,000 hours of analyzing iron deficiency only and patients iron deficiency only, or members of iron deficiency only. And I run the largest patient advocacy group for iron deficiency. So, I mean, that's a lot of, so take it for what it's worth, but I don't want to sound so angry about it. It's just, I have seen other people put unwell people in harm's way, whether it be somebody with influence, whether it be just talking on the internet. I'm not picking on either. I'm just saying in general, I've seen people put other people in harm's way. And by all means, I've already said, I love this social media platform. I love that we can share information instantly, and we can accidentally put other people in harm's way just by being excitable and sharing what we've learned. But we need to, ask more questions and not that I want to advocate, especially for women, to put doubt in their mind, because we're instilled to have doubt in our mind by our doctors, especially. And if any doctors are listening to this, I'm a big friend of doctors and I welcome them into my group. It's just, we've got to be careful. And instead of just coming up with one strong opinion, We've got to make sure that we're speaking accurately.
And there's room for possibilities and multiple
You have to have
variables.
an imagination too. And you have to be exploring and you have to be experiencing this before you start sharing things, because you could accidentally, I'm not even saying this is intentional, you could accidentally put people in harm's way. Oh, you don't need to supplement because you make vitamin D from the sun. Oh, you don't need to supplement with iron because everything's fortified with iron. Well, did you know that there are tens and tens and tens of things that are common in the diet that block iron absorption? No. Well, okay, so maybe don't speak on that if you're not experienced with it, you know?
Yeah.
I'm homozygous for vitamin D.
And there's hundreds of practitioners now that I think I told you I blocked 50 people, and they say, why do you block someone that has a different opinion than you? It was one night within half hour, block. It took me like half an hour. But I block people that are so aggressive and, attack, so what that I changed my mind. At least I'm doing it instead of like, clinging to my reputation or a book I wrote
Right.
or some view. That's a lot of people. Most people that I've met online are afraid to tarnish their reputation, where I don't care what people think about me.
Well, that speaks to your reputation and your brand of, I'm a human and I'm learning all of this. I enjoy learning all of this. I'm going to continue learning all of this. I mean, that's a brand in and of itself.
Well,
right?
I'm super, super grateful to have found you and your group, because that was a huge breakthrough. And it was like waking up out of a dream, literally, that I've been stuck in for the last 2 to 3 years of just this kind of cultish mindset that iron deficiency cannot possibly exist. And it's just obvious that it does.
But I think that speaks to a brand, your brand. I think that speaks to, and a lot of people resonate with that. Oh, wow. Oh, we're learning this now. Oh, okay. That makes sense. As opposed to, nope, closed-mindedness. I mean, what are you going to learn from closed-mindedness?
Absolutely. Yeah. Back to the ideal or just lab ranges.
Yeah, we should probably vitamin D lab range. There's more on that.
Well, I just wanted to ask you this question. So like people say blood work is just a snapshot, therefore it's not accurate. But like looking at trends, for example, like I have 3 different, like 2016, my ferritin was, I lost it. Oh, here it is. It was 71. And then 2019, my ferritin was 40. And then this year it was 68. So, right, I mean, within that narrow range, but between 2016 and a few weeks ago, it was only a difference of 3, which kind of speaks to the stability, right?
Ferritin is stable as long as, you're not dealing with anything that will falsely elevate it up and down.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I mean, it's stable, and it's going to reflect if you aren't absorbing enough, or if you're losing some, or if you're intentionally taking iron, you're actually absorbing it. It's going to reflect that, unless so when there is something falsely elevating it, that's when you really can't use ferritin as the marker. And I have seen false elevations even in the 40s and 60s too. And you said you have an inflammation issue. So, I mean, that, and you were telling me you think you were much lower, but for a longer time. So, I mean, I've seen it, that is possible.
Yeah. It'll be interesting once I lower the HS. I think fixing my stuff, my dental will normalize. Right.
Yeah.
But you had something to say about vitamin D. Sorry, I interrupted.
So with the VDR TAC gene mutations that I have, I'm homozygous for them. I had a vitamin D level of up and down from 20 to 30 my whole life. And I played tennis outside and fished my whole life. I'm a hunting and fishing guy's daughter. I grew up fishing my whole life and playing tennis. I was outside my whole life. I got wrinkles by 8 years old. That's what I got up here. I mean, I've had them and I've been outside. Now, so I had to go down the rabbit hole of VDR TAC, and I'm not an expert in that, but I had to go down that way. And everything that I read on published studies and articles of that say that anyone with vitamin D receptor TAC gene mutations needs to maintain their vitamin D around storage around 100 ng ml, so US units. And that's another thing too. People speak off the cuff without using units of measurement, and then it changes the total message too. You could be harming someone, or putting someone in harm's way, better phrased maybe. But anyway, so I raised mine from a 30, which is clinically I had doctors, oh, you're fine. You're right on the line. You're fine. I mean, they really don't know the concept that you can have symptoms go away if you raised your number. And this goes for just the concept of normal range versus optimal range. That's a huge learning curve most people don't have. That's a whole new world that I learned when I was 29, 30. I mean, that's a lifetime. When we should be understanding this as children and learning every year, we should be learning all sorts of things about nutrition and biology in the body. So I've seen some people argue there are studies out there on lifeguards, and the highest their vitamin D ever got was a 60. Okay. And we're talking US units. Okay. So your vitamin D should never be higher than 60. Well, I have the gene mutations. All research says I should hold it 100. The point is you can have a different optimal than other people. You can feel differently and not have symptoms at a certain number versus somebody else. I mean, it's beautiful. We're all individual. It's true. It doesn't have to be so concrete and black and white. Some people really do feel optimal with their vitamin D at 60, and they don't feel the benefits, or they feel negative things when it's higher in the 80s or 90s or 100. I have raised mine from 30 to 100. I've probably maintained it a year now. I would never go back. I just wouldn't. I'm not jumping up and down like most vitamin D people do. All of these groups have different personalities. It's so funny. And when I joined all the vitamin D groups, I'm like, wow, these people are fanatics. And they're happy. They're raving, they're jumping up. They're like, it's a lifestyle, and they're freaking out. And now I'm like, oh, I get it. I don't have all the benefits that they've received. So I've got other things going on with my health, but I definitely wouldn't go back. So some people can feel better at different numbers. And by all means, I've got to work on the things that open the vitamin D receptor, magnesium and zinc. I'm having to take a lot of zinc every day now. So the thing is, genes definitely come into play. Mm-hmm. They can. They may not be expressing, but that's up to the individual to explore and entertain, as opposed to somebody telling them, no, it's not, just because you have it doesn't mean it's expressing. Well, don't dismiss it.
It's all, I've heard it's all epigenetics. Epigenetics trumps genetics. It's like, not necessarily. It's like, they're both important.
Yeah. Yeah. And the body's an ecosystem. So, I mean, we don't even know what we don't know what's going on. So, vitamin D, I have come across a small handful of people in these different anxiety, depression, ADD groups and whatnot too, and vitamin D groups. And I have come across a small handful of people who have said, my bipolar or my schizophrenia is far less manageable when my vitamin D drops. Mm. And that's how I know when I need to get my vitamin D checked. And sure enough, it turns out it's lower. So, I mean, I've seen that, and these people don't have an incentive to lie. So what it registers in my brain is that it's possible, it's possible.
Yeah. It's funny. There's a group, I think, for every nutrient. Like there's the thiamine people, there's the copper people, there's the vitamin A people, but there's also the flip side for every pro group for the toxicity group, vitamin D toxicity, vitamin A.
Toxicity happens. It's real. Too much of anything is bad, but so is too little of something, right. and the
symptoms are the same, which is interesting, right? Like iron overload and iron deficiency.
Overload and deficiency has many of the same symptoms. They really, really do. And same for plenty of other nutrients and minerals. So, I mean, it is possible. It's just, a big takeaway that people should have is, or that I hope they have is that, anything is possible. And of course, too much of anything is bad, but also too little of anything is really, really bad too. So maybe go about it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I almost noticed like a nutrient supremacism thing going on where vitamin A runs circles around vitamin D, or copper is way more important than iron. But that's such a popular trend right now that, like I said, I got swept up into. It's very convincing. It's very enticing.
Right? A lot of this is very convincing. And we all know sex cells and drama cell, we know the cell. And it seems to be with a lot of these health groups is the fear mongering or some power stance, like, this nutrient is superior to another. No, it's not. The body's an ecosystem. It needs what it needs. So if you have too little of what you need, that's not good. If you have too much of what you need, that's probably not good. And it's probably throwing the ecosystem off balance. It's not one is better than the other. Now, it is interesting how some things have therapeutic effects, like the high dose thiamine. That's big in the thiamine groups and the studies on them as well. A lot of fibromyalgia patients take 1,500 milligrams of thiamine at least for therapeutic effects for their fibro. So that's really cool. And on that note, most people with iron deficiency are going to end up with a fibro or a chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis as well.
And dementia, you were saying, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if you end up with a dementia diagnosis, because that's also going to be probably a particular age range at least. But most of us who suffer from iron deficiency are mind blown. It's kind of punny, but a lot of us say, this is scary that I'm forgetting so much. It feels like I have dementia, but I'm 29 or I'm 42. I know I probably don't, but I have all the signs and symptoms. I mean, this is really scary. So it's scary.
I think discounting symptoms and bowing to authorities because they wrote a book or have a protocol or whatever is very common. Right.
Because we have been told they went to school for this. Well, we're learning the hard way. They didn't go to school for nutrition, but you said, bowing down.
Yeah. I had scary memory loss about a month ago. And at the same time, muscular extreme fatigue where, I do like exercise with oxygen on like an assault bike, type thing. And
Sounds awesome.
I was barely able to do it. Like I was just super winded. And
it's different. There's a change. Right. There's a delta there. Yeah.
And all the symptoms together, plus my test, I'm like, okay, there's no denying something iron deficiencies.
Like, maybe it is. Maybe there is something to this.
Do you have a lot of people in the group that mess themselves up on blood donation? Because I was looking for the condition. I have a million tabs open. I'm sure you have the same problem. And with that genetic mutation I have, it was basically saying you could have iron overload in the liver with this gene mutation, but deficiency everywhere else. So my theory is that potentially the first donation of my life, the only one in 34 years, I was maybe offloading some extra iron from my liver.
Yeah.
But then the second one, I overdid it. I only needed one.
Right. Maybe that was a full treatment for you at the time that you needed. It's so interesting because I'm not familiar with that specific gene mutation. I obviously am a fan of looking into that and testing everything and entertaining ideas. But yeah, so maybe you needed that offloading, like you said.
Yeah, because I felt
great.
Yeah, I just feel like you can really, because there's this idea that some people, like men, should donate every quarter for the rest of their life. Which if I, after 50, if I keep testing low or whatever, and, maybe I talk to a geneticist and I figure out I actually do have a malabsorption of iron of that DMT1 transporter, then I probably shouldn't do that, right? I probably maybe shouldn't even donate once a year.
And by all means, what you should be doing is monitoring yourself as opposed to just, hey, this protocol says I should do this point blank, black and white. Absolute. Maybe I should also monitor to make sure I'm not in the danger zone or harming myself. And by all means, even the concept of recognizing and thinking about how you feel after you eat food. That was something that I didn't even realize was a concept till I was 30 years old, 29 years old. We don't talk about that in grade school. Pay attention to how you feel after you eat foods. You might have certain food intolerances. Or you might have a certain condition that, makes eating this food makes you feel worse. Something, it could be anything. I mean, even just that's a huge learning curve. So just even the concept of, wow, maybe I could monitor it too. That's a whole new concept.
Do you think, I should have kind of kicked it off for this, but do you think the stat that 80% of the world is iron deficient is accurate? Because they say it's the most common deficiency, and then some people, it's very seductive to say, that's a WHO.
Yeah, that's a big problem. I don't know, because I haven't put myself in a position to be able to analyze certain things that would help me come to that conclusion. However, women are at high risk. Children are at high risk. So that's, if you look at the population, that's an insane, that's at least half the population. If you just look at men versus women, and then you add on the children thing. So that, you're over 50% there, possibly. And then if you were to add up, somebody was arguing with me on Facebook, and I usually don't divulge into totally arguing different points, especially because people pay me now for my analysis, and we're working on publishing the book right now. It should be published.
Oh, cool.
But, I'm spending my time on analyzing more than Facebook arguing. And that's actually, by the way, that was a symptom that alleviated after I raised my vitamin D and my ferritin from an 8 to over. I have to maintain mine over 300 right now because I was deficient for so long. And if it drops below 300, I start getting all sorts of terrible symptoms back. It's just extremely noticeable. From raising my vitamin D. I can scroll past people now on Facebook without, and I've always said, I'm just a very intense person with a lot of conviction. And, I like other people like that. You know yourself and you stand for something and have a high integrity. But
I think it's energy vampires, though, most of these people.
What was that?
I think most of these people are energy vampires. Yeah. They just want your attention. And that's like their goal.
Yeah, you have to be prioritizing where your time is. So, but I noticed that was something that I even talked about in my group. I said, oh my gosh, I can scroll past easily now. Like, this is a whole new thing. I used to, no, I have to tell them, I have to understand. But anyway, what was the point we were talking about? I didn't take my iron last week. I think I have a stomach cancer. I've got iron deficiency brain.
Well, we have a ton of questions. I figure I can pick the ones of topics that we didn't cover. But before we jump into that, I just want to talk about the safety of iron, specifically supplementation, because it was my understanding that, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been trying to intake 1 milligram a day. That's been my goal. Just kind of scary to think about.
Wow.
But yeah, because I was doing coffee, milk. Coffee with steak to block as much iron as I could, which with steak does have non-heme. I think that's a misconception, like that meat only has heme. It has both. And I think up to 60% is non-heme in a steak.
And I always say anything's possible. So if it's something I haven't heard of, I'm like, it might, but the point of heme versus non-heme is that heme comes from animal products. Right.
But the blockers
has a lot of non-heme as well too. I've seen so many things from people that don't have an incentive to lie tell me what's going on with their health. I'm like, wow, I never would have thought that based off what I've read. So yeah, it's possible.
Well, because we've been diving into it because like the whole people trying to block it, that the espresso that I drink, it only blocks the non-heme or the calcium, like you said, the non-heme.
Calcium will block the heme too, but the espresso coffee has tannin, which block the non-heme. So there's lots of tea, coffees, wine. Doesn't wine have tannins? Isn't that what the legs are? The tannins. So that can block it. But you were saying, I was asking how did you were you calculating so that you could only absorb 1 milligram a day? That was the intent.
No, it was just like, if I'm going to have a steak, I would have some espresso, and not like in a super orthorexia way, but like whenever I would like remember, and I love espresso anyway, but it's like, combine it with my iron so that I don't absorb as much, or drink some milk.
Well, men need to be aware of their iron status because they're more susceptible to overload because they don't have that offloading that women do.
Unless
it's something that they need to monitor.
Unless I'll put the link below to that John Adamson thing. It's because it's 10 minutes in, he has a table of causes of iron deficiency. And it's like 99% of these men could have. It's like parasitosis, tumor, ulcer, gastritis.
The causes are, there's only a tiny few that are gender specific or sex specific. It can happen.
Even
which
the
is mind-blowing for a lot of people. Yeah.
Right. Even the high stomach pH, because I just look at like over the years, the question, like the private messages that people have sent me, like questions like, what do you recommend for this? It's like ulcers every day, like internal bleeding every day. It's like low stomach acid every day someone asks me about. So I know these things are popular. And
Right.
all of those affect iron
And a
absorption.
lot of things that we're buying over the counter remedies for are signs that something like that is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we don't know any better until our health has finally gone so bad that we look on Facebook and Instagram. Excuse me.
Right. But but yeah, your guides on your Facebook, if someone is overwhelmed, and sure we'll have future chats, but your iron protocol group. I recommend looking at the guides and reading up what, some water.
My turning bright red. Do you mind if we pause for a second?
Yeah.
Because I have bad dark.
Yeah. So maybe we'll talk about supplementing iron at the very end. But we'll get to some of the questions here. And one of the common ones that the listeners asked was about the iron recycling system, because everyone's freaked out about that now. And someone asked how to fix the iron recycling system in our bodies. Is that something that we need to work hard to fix, or?
Right. If it's broken. I'm not an iron recycling expert because it hasn't been very relevant to iron deficiency. It is a cause of iron deficiency. It can be, but as you saw, there are tens and tens of causes of iron deficiency. So it is a real thing. The iron recycling system is real. And if you have anything off in that system, I can see how it could cause overload. You're transporting and you don't have the capacity maybe, and you're not correctly transporting, and therefore, toxic iron could, you're not transporting that and it's running around freely. So that could be an issue. But then that could also, there could also be an issue in the transport system where it's not getting transported and cause a deficiency as well. But to tell you the truth, it's pretty interesting that really hasn't totally come up much of the time at all for anybody's. And we have multiple polls of people's causes. And I'm a big advocate for getting ceruloplasmin tested, vitamin A, retinol, and more specifically palmitate, copper RBC instead of copper serum, because serum is usually normal, hiding a deficiency, or, it can hide a deficiency. So it's relevant. It's just for the probability of it happening, the likelihood, it's actually not very relevant. It's ended up not being very relevant to me analyzing thousands and thousands and thousands of people with iron deficiency. So yeah, it's a real, but it is a real thing that everyone should check out. I know copper, ceruloplasmin, and vitamin A are the fundamentals for that.
Have you heard of the marker serum transferrin receptor?
Yes, my doctor actually was big on testing that.
Do you think that's worth testing? Because I think one of the lectures I was watching, they could say an iron deficiency that's high or something. Yeah.
I think doesn't that have to do with the ability of absorbing? It hasn't been very relevant in my mass analysis of iron deficiency or people with iron deficiency and their journey. It hasn't been very relevant at all, but my doctor tested it multiple times and it was always normal. So it's interesting. That's where I'm coming from of my background, is a very specific niche of analyzing those with iron deficiency, what they go through, the many misdiagnoses well before finally being diagnosed with iron deficiency, or them having to get it tested and them diagnosing themselves with iron deficiency now that they've read the information, the guides, so that they can be more informed and know what tests to run. So I don't know too much about that. I think it's worth knowing about, I'm sure, but it hasn't been very relevant in my realm.
General thoughts on iron levels during pregnancy. Is it natural for them to lower as the pregnancy progresses?
Yeah, iron is required for growth and development. So the fetus needs it and is taking as much as it can, really. So it's completely required. And what usually ends up happening is, even with prenatals, the mother isn't taking enough iron to compensate for how much the baby ended up taking, especially if the mother was at, a suboptimal number, or a potentially iron deficient number, or suffering from iron deficiency. So typically they're not taking enough iron to compensate for that, which then ends up with iron deficiency and also iron deficiency anemia. Now we know that blood volume increases, and so it's normal for anyone pregnant to become anemic or to drop their hemoglobin. Well, that doesn't mean they have to be anemic. Let's entertain the thought that someone is pregnant, their blood volume increases, and therefore their hemoglobin drops 2 units of measurement. That doesn't mean they have to drop to an anemic state. They can, let's say your hemoglobin is a 14 or a 15. You can drop 2 units there down to a, 12 or 13. You don't have to be anemic. And let's say they weren't anemic to start out with. Let's say they were at a 12, but they dropped 2 units and they're down to a 10 and they're now anemic. You don't have to settle for the suffering of anemia just because some people may say, oh, that's normal to be anemic during pregnancy. Well, it's normal because women are at high risk for iron deficiency. And then when you're pregnant, you're at extreme high risk for iron deficiency. So that doesn't mean you don't have to tend to it just because the incidence rate is really high. So, and you can tend to it safely. Yeah.
This is a really good one on organ meats. If taking beef liver to support iron, how much would you actually need to take? And I've heard some people saying spleen has more, or you could get dried blood capsules now or whatever.
Right. And I'm actually an affiliate for Perfect Supplements that sells organ meats and some other products. Usually there isn't enough iron in them to raise ferritin sufficiently, especially in a timely manner. And the thing about iron deficiency is time has everything to do with it, because the longer you're deficient, the more suffering you have and the longer it takes to recover. So time is of the essence with iron deficiency. And that's why a lot of us with iron deficiency end up angry, because we realize 10, 15, 20 years we've been crying about this, and they could have just freaking tested our ferritin and seen it was a 4, So with organ meats, I actually didn't think they would totally be worth it to take, because I know some people will freeze it and cut it. They'll cut it and they'll freeze it and they'll take it as a pill themselves. Hey, I'm not that I'm saying it's redneck. I'm a redneck though. To me, rednecks are resourceful, problem solving, smart, redneck ingenuity. That sounds like something a redneck would come up. And that's a compliment. That's a good thing. So I'm a fan of that. I haven't done it myself. Maybe I should try it. But looking at the numbers, usually liver, when you buy a desiccated liver supplement, usually has 2 milligrams per serving. And usually the servings are 6 capsules. And some people, what's funny is a lot of people will complain about the number of supplements they take a day. And I'm like, I was so sick for so long. I'm like, I don't care if I had to be on dialysis every day to get my life back. I was so sick for so long. And we're so blessed to be in a country where we have so many supplements accessible, but obviously I can go on a tangent on that. So back to the organ supplements, the different organs have different iron content. And I didn't think that taking the organ meats would actually benefit anyone much when it comes to treating iron deficiency. But what I saw after a while of analyzing, especially over a year of analyzing people on desiccated organ meats, different organ meats, whether it be eating it or taking the actual frozen liver or whatever it may be as a supplement, or buying the organ meat supplements, what I analyzed and found out is a lot of people ended up feeling better, even though it was only marginally or not even at all really tending to their iron deficiency much. And it's probably because they're little nutrient bombs. They've got so many different things in there that we benefit from, and that a lot of people may be low in. So I don't think iron so far has any therapeutic effects. Like we were talking about the high dose thiamine, whether or not you're low in it can have therapeutic effects. And I don't know about B12, at least for me, it doesn't for me. And for a lot of people I've analyzed, but, so I don't know if I don't think it's because of any therapeutic effects. I think it's because a lot of people are low in a lot of things and they needed what was in them.
Mm-hmm.
So, usually there's a calculation in my guides in the heme iron section. And there's also right below that an organ meat section too. But in the heme section, I put a calculation of what I have found that most people need to take if they're only taking heme iron. What I have found for them to minimally need to take to raise ferritin. So there is a number for that. There's a calculation for that. And usually the organ meats is a more, it's a lot more effort considering it's so many more pills. That's why a lot of us use this one brand called 3 Arrows. I use Simply Heme, and some people use the Heme Plus. It's got methylfolate and methylcobalamin. But I always tell people to start with just the plain heme, in case you're sensitive to methyls. But that one per pill is 20 milligrams of heme iron polypeptide. So it's just the iron extracted from, it actually turns out to be grass-fed bovine spleen blood. So you can buy organ meats, or on the market now, there are actual heme iron polypeptides of just the iron from the heme, from the animals.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, because someone asked how to raise ferritin as quickly and safely as possible, which you said it's more of a marathon, not a sprint, right? Like,
yeah. So you can do infusions, you can do diet, but that's why the information in my guides are so helpful, because it's really to create your own protocol that works for you, and you're more informed about likelihoods and probable needs and, for intake and different things like that, and what blocks it and what doesn't. So, the body can only transport so much iron at a time. So you can't just take a whole bunch of iron pills in one day. You have to take what your body has the capacity for. So there's a calculation that we have from the American Society of Hematology as to what they say they see most people end up needing to take a day. So we have that calculation in the guides. And so that's just a general, what most people for your weight will probably end up needing to take. But then I go over in guide 3, in the section of understanding the iron panel, interpreting the iron panel, I go over testing the safety of your dose. So when I said earlier, I told my doctor, transparent saturation, I want mine to be 100%. He was like, that's not really how it works, but he didn't know how to explain it. So that's the body's capacity of safely transporting your iron. So if you're at 80% saturation, that's way too high. Now, if you eat some iron and then you go and do the test, it's probably going to end up around the 80s or 70s or 60s, depending on how much iron you just ingested. Because remember, the iron panel is an active snapshot. So we test the safety of our dose. We take what we take as our dose, and then within an hour to 2 hours, we do the iron panel. And if it comes back way too high, your dose is way too high. You can expect it to be above range. And even when you're supplementing, in general, you can expect it to be a little bit above range, because that range is built on fasting, or it should be. So it's a matter of how high is it. You don't want it too high, because you need room for any other incoming iron, because that saturation is going up and down all day. So is the iron serum, just based on you eating or not. So you can test the safety of your dose for sure. And by all means, there's a disclaimer there that most people, you don't want to take any more than 150 or 200 milligrams of non-heme in one dose. For most people, that's maximum. And we especially know that because doctors will say take 2 ferrous sulfates at once, let alone a day. But there's also different supplements that add up to 150 milligrams with just one pill. So we know that that's a general safety, but by all means, that could still be too high of a dose for your needs, which is why you want to test the safety of the dose.
Caitlyn, have you heard of the zinc taste test? Because supposedly if you're, you could take zinc sulfate, the liquid, and if you taste the metallic taste, then your zinc's deficient, is the idea. And I guess there's a few studies, and then if you can't taste it, that means you need it. And I wonder, because I've had people tell me, like even my realtor up here, when I sold my house, I think she had true iron overload and I did help her and I got her on liver and all this stuff. But she said she could taste the iron in the steak. I'm like, okay, if you're at that level, sounds like you have too much.
Yeah, maybe it's too much then. Yeah.
Right. And she had like
I don't know. I haven't heard about the zinc test that you mentioned. My potassium dropped a little bit and I never could eat carbs, and come to find out it's because B vitamins are needed for processing carbs. And I have some gene mutations there as well. And apparently I was low as well. And now I've been eating some russet potatoes because they're just the light of my life. And I've been saying, like, I can taste the potassium. It's just so good for me. I need it. But I haven't heard anything about the tasting of the iron meaning anything.
Okay. I was just curious. Right.
It could be. Some people even they say they end up with a metallic taste sometimes just from supplementing in general, which may or may not indicate anything actually happening other than just the supplementing. It may not indicate iron overload. Yeah.
I don't know if you covered this earlier, but how can we tell the difference between dysregulated iron and a deficiency? Would it just be reading the iron panel correctly?
Yeah. Testing your vitamin A, especially palmitate, copper, RBC, ceruloplasmin. There's any issues there, you probably have an iron dysregulation issue. And some trial and error probably. I don't have a perfect answer for that, but that's a good question actually for me to I bet I might be able to, if I thought about that a little bit more, I might be able to come up with a little bit more of I don't want to say an absolute, but more of a trial and error thing on that. But the first answer is test results. Yeah.
Yeah. What does it mean when you have normal iron in the blood? I guess they mean serum iron, but low stores, which I guess low ferritin, but normal serum iron.
Means iron deficiency. It means your body is trying to stay alive, and it's got so this is the thing is, most everyone, a big reason why iron deficiency doesn't get diagnosed is because the doctors aren't typically testing ferritin and they're testing the iron panel. And usually at all times, for most people, most of the time, the iron panel is totally within normal range. So that's what I was saying earlier. If it is in the red in any way, that's way past already a deficient state that you could have probably tended to or prevented from getting worse. So normal iron serum is totally normal. It doesn't tell you anything unless you know how it works and you purposely did your test a certain way with intent. So for example, if you want to know if you're absorbing, you take your iron dose before the blood work, like an hour or two before the blood work, and you can expect your iron serum to be high if you don't have absorption issues. And you can expect the saturation to be high, the percentage saturation to be high. But if you have absorption issues, if you want to see if you still have absorption issues, and you can go about it that way and see how the iron serum. So there's different ways. If you actually understand how it works, and you know how to, I don't want to say manipulate it, because that might, some people might infer that means that you're changing it somehow, but I just mean knowing how to use it.
Yeah,
it's useless. It's useless for diagnosing iron deficiency.
Okay. I think someone asked, I think there's a lot of confusion. People are like, how can a novice read an iron panel or understand the basics? It would be your guide, right? Like join the group,
yeah.
Of iron protocol.
It's actually really easy. It's just because we're trying to match, first of all, the brain fog that comes with iron deficiency makes everything really difficult. But we're also trying to match what our doctors have told us and what we also read online, or maybe have had some influence put upon us by somebody with a different opinion.
Yeah. So you're saying just it is easy to understand with reading.
It's actually easy to understand. It's just difficult when we're trying to match what other people who aren't experienced with it are saying to what we're reading, and we're trying to make them match, and it doesn't. So that's when it's most difficult, let alone with the brain fog that the iron deficiency comes with. So it's actually a simple concept. But most of us, it comes off overwhelming at first for most of us. Um, like you said, with my content, it's just the sheer volume of content is a lot, and that can be overwhelming just to look at. So it can cause a mental block, but
I think the analogies of checking savings and then maybe the
transporter
or whatever transferrin is. Right.
It's actually simple.
That helps.
And relatable. Yeah. It just, we're like, oh, I didn't think that at first.
What are your thoughts on copper? I don't think we talked about that too much. Is it the savior? Like, do people just need that to heal?
No, because what if you've lost iron from H. pylori? That's got nothing to do with iron dysregulation. And, but copper's super important and needed for ceruloplasmin. It's needed for, and it can even, it often helps iron absorption when you're copper replete, when you have a sufficient amount of copper, and when you're low in copper, it can, you have a lesser amount of absorbing iron in the stomach. So it's helpful and important, and it's necessary for the whole iron process, but it's, no more important than transferrin, than vitamin C, than vitamin D. I mean, it's just a component of the ecosystem that's needed. It's important, but it's not a savior.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's like a camp that says copper toxicity can never exist. And I think with gene mutations, I don't know how common Wilson's disease is, but that's probably a good question to ask, right? Is how common is Wilson's disease before you say that copper toxicity is impossible? Or
I have come across so many people that have shared with me I've asked for details and their blood work and whatnot to prove what they're saying. And anything can happen in the body. So I'm a big believer in, that's a red flag for me if somebody says iron deficiency doesn't exist, copper toxicity doesn't exist. Well, are you highly experienced in all gene mutations? Are you highly experienced in XYZ? How come I have plenty of women in my group that say they were copper toxic from the Mirena coil and they had all these issues. And then now that they've taken it out and dealt with the toxic copper, they feel completely different. Are you calling them a liar? They have no incentive to lie. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just kind of logic.
This is a good,
sorry.
This is a good one. Does COVID increase iron and create iron toxicity? I mean, my when I had COVID twice this year, my experience has been, and my research is it increases nutrient requirements for everything, and it could mess with your lab markers.
Which is why it increases the requirement. Yeah. Amongst, who knows, many other reasons possibly. We don't know everything about COVID, There'll be plenty of other reasons. But the question was, does it make more iron, or does it
cause iron toxicity to get COVID? Like if you take iron while you have COVID, are you going to die?
I've had plenty of people in my group take iron, even though I told them COVID, has depleted iron stores, which makes us think it eats iron. So, just FYI, because they're asking, should I stop? Because we read in the guides, plenty of causes are viruses, And so I've told them it's, it seems like it's feeding on iron. And we've had so many people say, I can't afford to not take this iron. I took the risk, and I would have been so much worse. I was so much worse the week I didn't take it. I'm so much better, and I'm healing better. So I haven't seen anyone die in my group. I've seen plenty of people take the iron, even though I stopped taking it. I was like, because the last, should I, or do I stop? And it's like, you do whatever you want. I'll tell you what I did, and then I'll tell you likelihoods that I've found. But, I have a big issue with people telling other people what to take, especially not knowing their background, especially, not knowing their background. I was going to say, and not being in the medical field, but that kind of doesn't totally mean much at this point when it comes to my point. Because a lot of us are harmed by what they're telling us to take and not take. So, I mean, I was prescribed a vegan diet when I was iron deficient because my doctor didn't know how to diagnose iron deficiency. So, you know what I mean? That's what I mean by that. I'm not trying to slight doctors. It's just,
yeah,
basic.
I don't know what this question means exactly. Caitlin, but what makes iron bioavailable? Because
I see
it's
that term thrown around a lot, and I think a lot of people who use it actually don't know what they're trying to say. Because I think it's one of those catchy words that a lot of people will use for attention so that they spend more time on their page and buy their services and consultations. We actually never, I used that word earlier only because I know your audience. But it's not relevant in our group at all. Like our group members don't even use it. And we have group members coming from all different backgrounds and all different protocols and all different insights. So that's actually a term that's not relevant to us. But what I'm assuming what they mean in regards to iron deficiency is usable iron, like iron not stored in your tissues. Now, the thing is ferritin is not toxic iron. Iron is toxic, and we develop overload when there is free, which means unbound iron running around in the body, and it deposits into organs and tissues, and it creates cancers and diseases and cancers. So what I'm assuming, if anybody's talking about bioavailable iron, I think what they're talking about is usable iron, like your recycling system has to be intact and usable and no issues there. So I think it's coming from that angle, when in reality, if we were to use that in the iron deficiency realm, probably would mean more about absorbability. So to reiterate, transferrin's job, and it naturally is a magnet to toxic iron. Transferrin's job is to find it and bind to it and transport it and bring it where it needs to go. When it's going into ferritin, that is not toxic unbound iron. That is bound to a protein, ferritin. And by all means, iron in your hemoglobin is bound to the protein hemoglobin. So, I mean, ferritin is not toxic, unsafe iron. It's the storage of excess iron. So you have to have an excess, which is why you have to take more than you daily would need when you're treating iron deficiency. You have to have an excess so that it stores in the ferritin. But bioavailability, you want to make sure your iron's usable, but when you're treating iron deficiency, you want it to go to storage, but nobody wants too much, and nobody wants unbound iron in their tissues, but there's ways to prevent that. You just monitor your iron panel and you make sure your saturation doesn't get too high.
Makes sense. It
actually does.
Yeah, sure.
Like if you start looking into it, you're like, oh, cool.
This is an interesting one. Is pica, eating ice, always related to iron deficiency, or can it be an iron recycling issue?
I don't know. I think, well, and the reason I say I don't know is because I haven't analyzed thousands and thousands of people with an iron recycling issue and analyzed their symptoms. But what was that?
Have you seen people in your group that had that were craving non-edible things? And
so pica or pica, however you pronounce it, is when you crave non-foods. Ice is the most common when it comes to iron deficiency. I always say anything's possible. I can't think of any other causes of it, but I'm sure there are other causes of it. But what's really, really interesting is we have found cravings in general with lower ferritin or iron deficiency are often uncontrollable, or just the simple fact that it's very common to have very intense, insatiable cravings with iron deficiency, no matter what it is. Could be for carbs, sweets, chocolate, whatever it might be, salty foods, whatever it might be, actual food as opposed to non-foods, which is what pica is. And we see regularly all the time, oh my gosh, I'm finishing my first month on the protocol, or I've just finished a week and a half and I'm no longer craving this every night or this every day. And so that's how we started realizing, oh my gosh, I mean, just cravings in general are insane when iron deficient. But so I don't know if, I'm sure it could be caused by other things, but as I stated earlier, an iron dysregulation issue, an iron recycling issue, like low copper it has been documented to cause iron deficiency. So, and then that could cause the pica or pica. So I know it could, but I don't know if iron dysregulation alone, I'm getting into semantics here. but yeah, an iron dysregulation issue can cause pica because it can cause the deficiency, and that's a common symptom of a deficiency.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to pick questions that you haven't covered, but it's probably helpful to hear things a few times for people. But
no, it's really helpful for me to repeat anyway. Yeah.
Can iron deficiency be remedied by food alone? I forgot if you talked about that.
It can, if you know how to eat the foods so that they're absorbed, and also if you know how much that you likely need to end up consuming. So it is it's a concerted effort. You have to be knowledgeable about it. You can't just eat a steak a day. It doesn't work like it doesn't help. And reminder, the majority of people with iron deficiency are meat eaters. So clearly, that's not just helping, and it also isn't preventative.
I wonder if that's why the carnivore diet's trending so much. I've been thinking just the last few weeks.
Totally possible. I thought of that too.
Yeah, because it's super popular, and people aren't lying that they feel good on it. I mean,
and there are all sorts of, like I said, little nutrient bombs in the organ meats. There are all sorts of benefits. I did my Genova ions test. I know we've talked about oats tests and things like that, but that Genova ions test had 125 different markers. And what I was low in, everything said I needed to eat beef and eggs. I mean, there's benefits to animal products. There's that we need, that, we're suffering from we can suffer from when it's low. So that carnivore diet, especially for women, there's a chance it can really make them feel better, not only because they're nutrient bombs, but also maybe the iron. I mean, if you're consuming enough, like I said, liver itself in just a serving has only 2 milligrams of iron, at least in a desiccated liver serving. I don't know about the actual, like a 6-ounce serving of actual liver.
Yeah, I forget. We found a study that basically spelled out that food is not enough for a lot of people.
It can't be,
Right.
Because there's so many iron deficient. Yeah.
Because the same argument's made for vitamin C. All we need is fruit, and we never need to, the milligrams of ascorbic acid are way too high beyond what we need. But when you look at EMFs and all these, Doris Lowe's research and infections and all these things, oftentimes the dosage of things we need to get via supplementation.
Right.
And, whether it's sun or whatever is not enough
Yeah. I mean, the point is it's very possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a major takeaway. It's very possible that we need supplements for certain things, or that me as an individual, that I need supplements for certain things. My group, we don't advocate for people just blindly supplementing anything. We're big fans of tests and paying attention to how you feel before and after, and increases in test results as well. And safely doing things and thoroughly, because some people will come in our group and just say, how much iron do I take? And it's like, we don't do that. This is first of all, it's a self-help group. You need to realize, but secondly, there's so much you need to understand. You shouldn't ever just start putting stuff in your body. But by all means, so many of us are so unwell. We're like, please, somebody just tell me what to do. So I get it. I've been there for a long time. I totally get it. But especially when something with iron, you don't want to take too much of. A lot of people say, B vitamins, you can't take too much of because you just pee out, like B12, for example. Well, some of us have gene mutations, and we get really bad symptoms from too much as well. So anything's possible.
Mm-hmm. This is a really good one that we didn't talk about. Cast iron pans and that iron fish. I think you said with iron fish, you'd have to be drinking the water constantly, right?
Yeah. So you think about it, what I think is really telling is personal experience and analyzing mass anecdotal experience. And we have thousands of people in my group saying, I've grown up on a cast iron skillet. All I cook out of is a cast iron skillet, and I'm severely iron deficient. It doesn't work. And if you compare the amount, you can Google how much you are likely to absorb from it. And then you compare it to your calculated range of how much you probably are going to end up needing to take daily. It's incomparable. I mean, it's far too low. So it makes sense mathematics wise. None of this is opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I did a deep dive on
mathematics.
Makes sense. Yeah. If the cast iron seasoned, I found that you don't absorb really any of the iron because I was trying to avoid it. So, right.
Oh, that makes sense. Light bulb. Yeah.
It's like
and
a
most
coating.
people have to have it seasoned.
Right.
I'm actually in the middle of seasoning mine. I set it to the side to season it because it's not. And I put in some onions and I'm like, these are black. Like this is probably the iron and some rust. And it quickly rusted. It wasn't, like I'm sitting there with a rusting pan or whatever, but yeah, that's fine. That makes sense because the layer.
Mm-hmm.
And the iron fish can help people that maybe perhaps if you have a harder time tolerating certain irons, but by all means, we go over plenty of the different types of irons in the group in the guides. There's a supplements post in the treatments guide, and we've got specific notes on them and findings in the analysis. And there are plenty of people that can't tolerate certain supplements, but can tolerate others. A large takeaway I want people to understand is that there are a lot more options now than what the doctors typically prescribe. But by all means, some people can't digest a certain way. Some people are more sensitive for whatever reason. I've even come across 2 people that claim they're allergic to iron. And they were giving me all sorts of examples, whatever. I'm like, you don't have an incentive to lie. But the iron fish could work for somebody. Some people prefer spa tone. They can digest that over oral supplements. Spa tone's the kind you pour in your drink. So with that being said, because they can tolerate spa tone over oral supplements, there's a chance some people can tolerate iron fish if they're boiling their water and drinking that water all day. If you especially are pairing it with the high dose vitamin C, so that because over time your hepcidin just continues to increase, and especially after doses it increases as well. It would just be very hard to do. It would be very hard to get enough, but some people are suffering so badly and they're desperate and they can't tolerate anything and they need some sort of resources. So we do have plenty of different alternative, means of and examples of ways people are intaking iron, even though they can't totally tolerate it.
That's awesome.
Orally. They can't tolerate it orally. So traditional.
We answered a lot of the questions here that I'm going through. Probably half of them you already talked about, but
Good.
I did see beta thalassemia. We had a few questions on, or thalassemia minor, if you looked at that.
So I'm not an expert in that, but it's my understanding that with thal, they become, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to paraphrase my general understanding that with thal, you can end up anemic and need transfusions. And there's a common mistreatment of giving iron infusions or taking iron when really, they're not low in iron. It's a RBC, I believe RBC issue. And so especially after so many transfusions, there's a risk of iron overload because there's iron in the blood that they're being transfused with. So there's a common misconception that to not take iron because of the misconception of the treatment, being iron related, and then the negative effects from that. So with thal, just because you have thal does not mean you shouldn't treat your iron deficiency or that you can't, or that it's a totally dangerous situation. So it's actually a common topic, and I have one of the posts for thal in my common topics guide in the group in guide number 4. And that way everyone on that thread can talk about it with each other. So I always direct people there, and it's been so nice. A lot of members have said it's been so nice for them to see other people with thal having thal and their experience, and realizing it is important to treat their iron deficiency, and they can, and it doesn't mean they're going to overload. Because there's a whole web of misconception, mistreatment, traditionally, all sorts of things at play there, and can change the just perception of what to do about it, and make it scary too. So thal is definitely a relevant topic, and just because you have thal does not mean you have to be iron deficient, and it doesn't mean if you treat it you're going to get overload. That's the point.
Okay, awesome.
It does need to be treated.
And when would be a good time to get an iron infusion? Someone asked, since you brought that up.
They might be asking that if they're a woman in regards to their menses. I do see that a lot. It kind of doesn't matter, honestly, because there's so many different iron doses of the iron infusion. And then it really doesn't matter the timing. It doesn't. We have an iron infusions post, and I've had 3. We're big fans of iron infusions. Sorry, my dogs.
Have you seen men get them too? Or
yeah. And there's a misconception too that postmenopausal women should be afraid of iron, can't take iron. No, anyone iron deficient should be, properly diagnosed and potentially can treat it. It just depends on everything. But just because you're postmenopausal doesn't mean you can't treat your iron deficiency. Just because you have FAL doesn't mean you can't treat your iron deficiency. If you Google it, fear cells, articles with fear totally cells. So there's a lot of articles, that used to be in different magazines, be careful, don't take iron if you're postmenopausal. Well, no one should take iron if they don't need it. The thing is that with postmenopausal women, they're not getting rid of all that iron every month anymore. So they may not need the iron. That doesn't mean they can be iron deficient and they shouldn't treat it. They just get the test. So it's good to have platforms to be able to discuss that and iron that out, for lack of a better term. But for iron infusions, there's not necessarily a perfect timing, but there is a very, very important iron infusions post in the treatments guide in the iron protocol that goes over how iron infusions can be dangerous, what you should test first, what you should have optimal first. So anyone interested in iron infusions, you definitely need to read that post before getting any iron infusions.
That's great. Yeah, someone commented, I had an iron infusion 8 months ago. Ferritin is back down to 8.
It just
my body be getting rid of so much iron because I don't need it. Currently 34 weeks pregnant. So
no, they're and I don't mean to say that arrogant, but they're not as experienced as sorry, my dogs don't know what they want, but they just know they want to whine at me right now. So sorry. I've come across thousands of comments like that and questions like that, and people sharing their experiences like that. They're not as experienced in iron deficiency as it would benefit them if they were more experienced. So your experience with an infusion completely depends on the dose and doses. It depends on your other nutritional markers that are explained in the infusions post. It also depends on if your cause or causes are fixed. So a lot of people will, get an infusion no matter what the dose, and then retest several months later and say, it didn't work. My ferritin is back down to a 4. And it's like, well, did you fix your causes? Well, no. Well, that's like filling water into a bucket that has holes in it. It just, your cause, if you still have your causes, it's especially if they're heavy periods, it's just going to go away. Or if you get pregnant, that's going to take all your iron. So, anyone who's had an infusion and, you think it may not have worked, or you're a little confused and you don't know why the result was the result, definitely read the information in the group on the infusions. It's so nice and clarifying. It's like, and it's easy to make sense of it. It's not if you don't have that information. So yeah, if you've had an infusion, I've even seen some in other groups that are anti-iron and say, I had an iron infusion and it ruined my life. Well, what was the dose? What was your ferritin before? What was the ferritin? What were your causes? What was this other marker and that other marker and this other marker? And they don't have the answers for it, but they're blaming the iron infusion. It's like, well, there's a lot to an iron infusion that your doctor usually doesn't know. And so that's why you need to be paired with this information. Because you may come to a conclusion that the iron infusion was bad, when in reality it wasn't, these other things were tended to beforehand, and you shouldn't have gotten an iron infusion in that circumstance. So
Makes
So it
sense.
was bad. It's just, it's not bad in general. It's just you shouldn't have gotten it because of these parameters. So
Did they ever make
formed.
Did they ever put vitamin C with it in the iron infusion? Have you seen, or is that something you just take
No,
for?
I haven't seen that. They typically don't put it in there or do another bag of it. It wouldn't help with absorption because it's going straight into the vein. But what it would help with is any oxidative stress.
Mm.
So some people even have joint pain after an infusion. And I'm like, it's probably either the oxidative stress or you depleted a cofactor that you don't realize that's needed for joints. So it would probably benefit a lot of people after an infusion to have vitamin C, perhaps glutathione, any other antioxidants regularly.
Awesome. Just do a few more. Appreciate the time. It's a long episode.
Obviously, I can go on forever, but I prepared you. You know what you're going to do.
Is hair tissue mineral analysis a valid way of telling if you're iron deficient or have iron overload?
I think it's possible, but I have not analyzed thousands of people with their blood work and their HTMA. And then let's say after supplementing or after donating blood, and then their HTMA and their blood work to compare. And I think that that's what's needed to be done to have a definitive answer or the closest to a definitive answer on whether HTMA is valid or not. And the problem is I don't see anybody doing that analysis, but they're touting opinions on it. And I don't think that's, what's the opposite of misleading? I don't think that that's, fair leading. What am I thinking of? By the way, if you can't think of certain words, that's actually a common iron deficiency symptom. And there's a term for it. It's called word searching. Yeah. It's common with ADD, but it's also common with iron deficiency. Common words. Yeah. That's a great question.
Yeah, I'm about to have a show on it and dive into it. I've never had one done, so I do want to check it out. But this is a funny one. Who do I put my trust in? Or should I just ignore iron entirely at this point? So it's basically
You're probably going to end up
confusion.
Yeah. And that's a valid question because there's so many polarizing opinions on it. And then especially the iron deficient person doesn't know what to do with it because you've all this brain fog and you can't make sense of heads or tails of things. Even when something's very obvious, like everyone in the world has hemochromatosis. I mean, I'll ask people because people will come to my group and say, I'm so confused. I'm overwhelmed. And honestly, I feel so defeated right now. And I don't even want to try this anymore. It's more demoralizing. It can be. So I think that's a very valid question and something that a lot of people go through. And I think that's really, really important because I always tell people, consider the source of your information. That's why I've said multiple times in this podcast, I do not have medical training. I'm not a medical professional. This is somebody who wanted to save her own life and was determined to save her own life. And this is my background. I've analyzed iron deficiency and the experience with iron deficiency only. And there's some offshoots that have come with that because it's relevant to iron deficiency. But I've specifically only studied iron deficiency only for over 4,000 hours, at least. I'm sure it's much more than that at this point. But it's a very valid question because some people sound so knowledgeable. But then I ask them, what's their experience with iron deficiency? And they're like, I don't know. And it's like, well, do you realize how silly that sounds that you're considering somebody's opinion that isn't an expert in iron deficiency? And I don't mean it in a condescending way. I mean it in a logic, let's think logically, because having iron deficiency, it's really hard to make sense of things. It's hard to utilize logic. It's hard to have common sense too. And I don't mean this in a degrading way. I don't mean this in an attacking way. This is my experience and what most everyone in my group says they consider is going on with themselves. They have some serious issues making sense of things. And I get this question a lot. I'm so confused. I'm overwhelmed because I don't know who to listen to. Well, first of all, not that I'm trying to make this about a promo for my group, but my group gives a lot of information. So I have to talk about, how to take in that information. First of all, in my group, we're not telling you what to take. We're giving you information so that you're more informed and you can make a protocol that works for you and you can make decisions that work for you. And here's where it's coming from. It's coming from mass analysis of real-time iron deficiency experiences mixed with vetting out studies and research. So first and foremost, consider the source. And this is where this information is coming from and how to utilize it. So, I used to, when I first started diving into this, I think I mentioned earlier, I made several conclusions just from reading the resources and studies. And I was wrong on the conclusions I came up with. And that's because I hadn't paired it and matched it to real life experiences, especially thousands of them. So I have seen a lot of people give opinions on iron deficiency who have not specifically studied iron deficiency. And you really have to consider the source. Don't you think?
That's a great point. Yeah. And I think one thing I've noticed, especially the last week or two, is people point fingers and say, oh, you have or had a financial interest in this. Therefore, your opinion on this is invalid or whatever. But I think whether you're an affiliate for products, which both of us are, I have my own supplement line. Some people, run a group, a Facebook group, or wrote a book, or have a protocol, or I feel like everyone has financial vested interest in their viewpoint. And so you can't use that argument that, oh, they have a financial interest, because everybody has a financial interest because we have to pay rent and everything. I mean, I
get what you mean, but I do think that a conflict of interest creates an opportunity for a message to get thwarted or bias to be there. Right. So that's why I actually have always told my group members I will never sell an iron supplement, because I don't want anyone to have some sort of doubt of the content. The reason my group is so valuable is the content is accurate. And that's what people say when they join the group and they've been in it for a week or two, a month or two, and they go, I've been trying to vet out what I should do. And so I decided to finally do a little bit of iron, and I am finding all of this content accurate. And so there's a trust factor built in there that I definitely don't want to compromise. Now with me, I only have started to figure out how to monetize this relatively recently compared to how long I've been doing this. And it was with the help of my group members telling me, Caitlyn, you need to be making money off of this. You were spending more than full time in this. And, I had other health issues, and I left my job for medical leave last year. So I needed some sort of financial support anyway. But I definitely think there is room for a conflict of interest if there's, I do tell people, chase the money. And you will see with my group, I'm trying to make money through all sorts of ways. So you can't say she pushes an iron supplement or she's anti-infusion. I'm trying to make money from everything so that kind of negates itself, because I do think that's valid. However, people do need to end up, especially when they have a level of influence, do need to end up figuring out how to monetize this. I mean, this is the way the world we are now. So I do hear what you're saying, and I agree to an extent. But what I say in my group is to chase the money, as in the specific money. There's some people out there who only have created a group because they need more traction for their product, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I've dealt with this in my group with some people trying to advertise, and then my group members reporting it and saying, that's not right. You shouldn't, this group is so, what do you want to call it? Altruistic and accurate. You don't want to dumb it. You don't want to discredit it in any way, and have anyone advertise. And I'm like, well, hold on. We're all about information here. Just because they're advertising this product doesn't mean it's a bad product, and doesn't mean it can't help. So let me talk to the owner. Let me figure out what's going on. And sometimes you'll even see in my group, I've said, hey, I'm trying to figure out this question about iron deficiency in this particular area. Does anybody want to volunteer to be like my own sampling pool? Kind of like our own little study or something like that. And so if it's an iron product, I didn't agree to putting the heme iron by 3 arrows on my favorites page of iron supplements until I was able to analyze tens and tens of people on this heme iron supplement. I saw it was working, and I also didn't see them having violent reactions or dying. Like that was my main criteria. So I tell them to chase the money in because you do have to explore. Is there a reason they're saying this? Is there a reason they're saying that? I think it's valid, but I also think people have to, especially when they finally come to a level of influence, figure out how to monetize what they've had to. So I see both sides of it. And I do think chasing the money is important, but that doesn't mean that the message is always thwarted or that the product's bad. It doesn't always mean something bad.
Yeah. And I think the amount of free information that you put out says a lot too. And do you think you'll ever write a book? If you had
Thanks. We're working on publishing the guides right now. Because that's a whole dynamic with the free information on there. And then, it being a self-help group, and there's going to be more content in the book as well. And so it's exciting. I've had a lot of people ask for it. And I love the guides on Facebook. To me, it's very easily navigable. It's able to be navigated quite easily for me, but some people still struggle with it, and some people don't. Some people really only use mobile browser, and it's not totally on there. So it's exciting. I've had a lot of people ask me to publish the guide, so that's why I'm doing that. And plus, I'm doing this full time. So I love they're awesome.
You definitely have to be compensated. I don't think people realize how much time goes into just putting information together and connecting dots, because there aren't a lot of people doing it. And I hope. I'll do my best to share your book, because it's interesting that.
Oh, thank you.
Dr. Joseph Mercola is writing a book on iron overload now, and he's a huge proponent of most people have iron overload because of iron filings
recently, and that was a big.
It's going mainstream. It seems like
raise everyone in my kind of chase the money thing on that too. That was
right.
Not that I'm accusing him of anything, but it's kind of like, if you're saying that, as there's a reason you're saying that, because it's not true.
Right.
Educating over iron overload is important. So is iron deficiency.
Yeah.
There are a lot of issues in the body that happen when you don't have what you need. So.
Yeah, it seems like a huge section of the natural health community. It is going mainstream towards that direction of almost everybody has iron overload and nobody has iron deficiency, and it's super dangerous.
It is super dangerous. And the thing is when you read these experiences from people that have these dangerous experiences from trying protocols that told them, no, you have iron overload, not iron deficiency. You have iron overload. You need to go donate blood, or you need to focus on copper or magnesium and not take iron, whatever it may be. I mean, when you read these experiences of how harmed they were, it doesn't make sense to not take that in and have that register. Now, I have seen some people say, I had an iron infusion ever in my life. I took iron supplements, and I had the worst stomach upset, and it was because of toxic iron and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, actually, it's because okay, which form did you do? Oh, okay, ferrous sulfate. That's because the majority of people can't tolerate ferrous sulfate. Oh, you had an iron infusion and it ruined your life. What were your phosphate levels and vitamin D levels before the infusion? I don't know. Well, that's likely what ended up happening based on statistics. That's likely what ended up happening was it lowering those and you suffering long-term from those. It's not because you had toxic iron overload, and it's not because iron was bad. It's because of all these other factors. I mean, you have to be educated in this before making an opinion. You can share I'm a big advocate for sharing your experience, but to say something definitively, like, I took iron supplements and it caused me iron overload or toxicity. It's like, well, first of all, those are two different things. And then, so I always ask people more details on it, so I can tell them what actually really happened or what likely happened too.
That's a great point. Yeah, all those variables, and those same people often become cheerleaders, or the biggest cheerleaders of a certain protocol.
Oh, yeah.
And then go on to influence people to
the
fear porn, and
because we have people like that too in my group who say, Caitlyn, I'm able to now play with my kids for the first time. This is so much better. My libido's back. My husband's so happy. My wife is so happy. I mean, just quality of life improvements now that they're treating their iron deficiency. And so we have champions as well. But what I reiterate throughout the group, and I monitor as well, is to speak impeccably and articulately, so that you're not just saying, take iron, you're going to feel amazing. No, you can't promise you're going to feel amazing. Healing from iron deficiency really sucks. It's a long journey most of the time. Some people feel benefits within that same week, and we see a lot of those posts. Oh my God, is this all in my head? Is this a placebo effect, like what you told me? Oh my God, I'm feeling better in these different ways. And I tell people, it could be a placebo effect, and if it is, cool. But by all means, we do see this commonly as well, so it can happen. But usually the journey is up and down. The oral supplements are not always tolerated, especially the most commonly prescribed ones. They're horribly tolerated. So it's just a crappy journey, and you have to speak, and you have to speak articulately about it. And by all means, I was engaging with someone in another group this past week that was arguing with me that isn't familiar with my protocol, and was saying, basically, it took her a while to say the point that not everyone should treat iron deficiency. She wasn't even understanding that she was technically iron deficient, but she was coming back with high saturation fasting. Well, you could be iron avid. You could be on high dose vitamin D or B12 that can cause the high saturation. Did you eat before the test? If you ate before the test, it's going to come back high. There's all these different variables. So just because you're diagnosed iron deficient doesn't mean you necessarily should treat, especially with high dose oral iron or iron infusions necessarily. Because what if it is a dysregulation issue as well? And and you just need to fix the dysregulation issue, like maybe it's low vitamin A or low bioavailable copper, maybe. And you just need to treat that. And then you're able to now absorb more and transport more. Maybe I always say anything's possible. But I was arguing with somebody, I let myself, just because it was in a science related and focused group that is really focused down, at the cellular level. And I wanted to spell out, main points to her argument. And I really wanted her to clarify her argument. And it took her a little bit, because she was saying she wasn't iron deficient. It's like, no, you are technically iron deficient. Your ferritin is an 18. And she said, I never had symptoms either. I said, that's okay. A lot of people don't have symptoms. And all of the iron, there's tons of iron deficiency symptoms, and a lot of people don't experience all of them. That's common too. So that's okay. And she said, and I had high saturation, so I wasn't iron deficient. I go, no, you were technically iron deficient. But maybe because you had high iron saturation all the time, maybe that means it was transporting everywhere and getting everywhere where it needed to go. And so therefore you didn't have a lack of iron, and causing the symptoms, but you technically did have a deficiency. But my protocol goes over the main fundamental points you need to understand. And then you make decisions for yourself and make a protocol that works for you. And it's not saying that everyone needs to be on iron. It's not saying that everyone's iron deficient. And it's also not saying that, hey, if you're iron deficient, you need to take oral supplements. I really don't like when I see people, especially with inexperience, telling other people what to take. Because if I, over 4,000 hours, sorry, Luke was here. If I, with over 4,000 hours of analyzing people's experiences, if I still don't feel comfortable saying you need to take this, somebody with less experience, especially not in iron deficiency, shouldn't be saying you need to take this or you should take this. Or especially promising you will feel this afterwards. That's a big problem too, because there's a lot of emotions in all of this too, and people get worn out, especially like the chronic fatigue groups and suffering from fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. You have you've tried all these different supposed remedies and nothing's working, and you're being hopeful, and there's so many emotions involved in the disappointment. So that comes with everything we're talking about as well. So I don't agree with saying, oh, you're going to feel so much better about this. So we even, as a general consensus, don't talk like that either in my group, because it's like, no, it's possible that, I'm so proud of my group, because a lot of them have, over the last several years, have become so knowledgeable and experienced with this. And it just helps maintain the culture of the group of being informative and speaking accurately and saying, it's possible you'll feel better. It's possible you might not. It's highly likely you'll feel better, whatever it may be.
Yeah. The group's awesome. Like it was very hard to stop searching around in the group when I first found it. So, I did want to ask you, is there any, like, I finally got my printer working. Like, would I have to copy and paste every part of the guide to like be able to print it out? Okay.
Yeah. For now, you can, if anybody wants, because we all learn differently, which is why I need to be doing TikTok and YouTube. So I'll be doing that soon. But we all learn differently, and a lot of people prefer to print the guides and highlight and make notes themselves. And in Guide 1 Preface, there is an outline. I call it an outline cheat sheet because it tells you where to find the answers and why that point's important. And a lot of people say, I'm overwhelmed, because even just seeing the sheer volume of information puts a mental block. But I actually spent tens and tens of hours formatting it for people with anxiety and brain fog. So it's funny, objectively, it's funny. Oh, I'm so lost. I don't even know what to do. I don't know where I'm at in the guides. Well, did you read the title? It says like step 1 is to determine whether or not you're iron deficient. So let us know where you're confused on that, and then we'll help answer that. So even the titles, it's what I'm saying is funny is that it's something so simple as a title it ends up being so helpful. That's what I'm saying is funny, not that anyone's struggling, and I'm not making fun of them, because like I've said multiple times, having brain fog and anxiety comes with iron deficiency. So that's expected for anyone to be overwhelmed.
Yeah. Notice a lot of the parts of the guide, you'll say, I repeat if you're, the ferritin section, if you're below 100, skip the section or whatever, so.
Yeah, I try to be very clear, but even, for a lot of us with iron deficiency and healing from, honestly, just seeing the volume of it, that mental block it creates is so bad, because it's like, I actually go way out of my way to tell you a directional guide. Okay, if you have this, skip down here, or, skip, don't even read everything in this section if it doesn't apply to you. And I grew up with unmedicated ADD. So, it's essentially a learning disability. So I can relate to this. I'm like, I know I've been there my whole life, my whole childhood, and it's defeating too. So there's that emotional component I was talking about. So anyway, it is highly organized to be user-friendly. It's just, unfortunately, with iron deficiency, it's really hard to help yourself. And especially if it's concurrent with another deficiency, which is common and quite expected. It's possible not to, but it's so common. It's highly likely.
Mm-hmm. Well, Caitlyn, this was really awesome. And I think a great introduction for people that have been overwhelmed with all the information, opposing viewpoints. And I'm relieved to share this information as someone that's been championing the opposite view that iron deficiency isn't real for years. So glad to share the truth and really appreciate what you're doing with the Iron Protocol and putting out good information.
Thank you so much for having me. And, it's really hard to get through to anyone who has been really focusing on learning an anti-iron stance. And, we do have a lot of folks that have ended up iron deficiency from that stance, and ended up iron deficient from that stance. And they somehow, came into the group and they sought out the group because they were finally, unfortunately, having their own health issues. So it's really hard to get through to anyone anti-iron, but the truth is, anything's possible. And my group does not say, everyone should treat iron deficiency, but it's just a collection of resources. So we welcome anyone. We share a lot of stories about how doctors have harmed us, and there's a lot of emotions in the group, and especially about doctors, but we have a lot of medical professionals learning the protocol for their practices, and we welcome them, and we're excited for anyone there. Any medical professional coming into the group, we're happy to have them, but just a couple of those caveats, it can be there. So we're really, really happy that you're in the group and just open to seeing another perspective. And I know my group members brought up, they saw your Instagram story about, me being on, and they're really excited. And, when you find information, just like how some other protocols can help a lot of people, you want to share good news and helpful information. So I do get that too. So I know a lot of my members are really happy that you have invited me on, and are just also proud of you for being open-minded.
That's awesome.
So thank you on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think we've talked about it. There's not one size fit all protocol.
Right.
I created my own protocol for fibrosis and calcification and lipofuscin, but every one protocol is not going to work for everyone. And I think that's a very grounded perspective to have.
I agree. Yeah. Because even the calculations in my protocol that say, hey, this is what the American Society of Hematology says works for most people. Even those calculations, some people need less and some people need more. So the information in my protocol is really just so that anyone can create a protocol that works best for them. Because really I've yet to find a one size fits all protocol unless it's, manageable like that. So I agree. So thank you very, very much. And we hope, anyone interested in learning, about maybe the other side or learning more about their iron deficiency, we would love to have them. So my group members are very happy and excited about you featuring me. So thank you very much.
Love it. Well, thanks, Caitlyn. I'll put the links below so you guys can check out all that stuff, and stick around as I close out the show.
Awesome. Thanks.
Forgot to tell you guys to have your notepad ready, but if you're a frequent listener of this podcast, you probably know already to be ready to take notes. I took so many. I learned so much already from Caitlyn and her group, the Iron Protocol. I really like how grounded she is in her approach. It's not demonizing certain nutrients like ascorbic acid, vitamin D, iron supplements, zinc, all these things that have proven benefits for a plethora of different health conditions. I think the fear of supplementing iron has been overblown, and it's so contextual with genetics, which people discount. A lot of the health community will say that epigenetics trumps genetics, and I completely disagree with that. Genetics are so important. And if someone has hereditary hemochromatosis, like Caitlyn has, there's so much nuance to the discussion that they can still be iron deficient, like Caitlyn is, even though she has the genes for hereditary hemochromatosis. So this is not just a simple cut and dry conversation that, nobody has iron deficiency, nobody's anemic, everyone has anemia of chronic inflammation across the board, period, end of story. Like I used to believe for the last several years. That's a very simplistic approach, and it really does a disservice to the people that are really struggling with fatigue, specifically women, but also men. It's just as much an issue for men, in my opinion, with the iron deficiency problem. And I've been saying that I'm just done with the fear mongering, like demonizing certain nutrients, because the proof is in the pudding. It's not just suppressing symptoms or stopping symptoms. People are having long-term healing effects from these substances, whether it's ascorbic acid or vitamin D or iron supplementation, either non-heme or heme iron supplementation. So there's so much context and nuance. And I like that Caitlyn built that into her group and her protocol, because the fear really harms people. It scares them away from things that could potentially give them immediate relief and huge benefits. I really think that this iron overload message is going mainstream now that Mercola is writing a book about it and promoting this idea that everybody, verbatim quote from Dr. Mercola, is iron overloaded or has too much iron. That's a very dangerous statement, especially for someone with his pull to make. So I think we have to come back to balance. I think we have to come back to reality. Iron overload can exist and iron deficiency can exist on the same planet. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And people are dealing with both problems. And I would agree with Caitlyn that of the two, the more prevalent one is iron deficiency. So if you want to learn more about iron deficiency and the work that Caitlyn's doing, go over to Facebook and check out the Iron Protocol. She also has a website, which is theironprotocol.com. And hopefully she comes out with that book soon, because a lot of people like to hold the information in their hand. And as she said, at this point, you have to print out the guides, which is a whole book. If you go through the guides that she wrote there, there's a lot of information. I think it's awesome that she emphasizes the difference between anemia and iron deficiency. I'm going to read a little section from her website. The problem is you can have normal hemoglobin, but still be iron deficient. You can also have low hemoglobin, but it could be caused by something other than low iron. Anemia does not equal iron deficiency. These terms are not interchangeable. It's great to look at the big picture, but keep in mind, normal hemoglobin level does not rule out iron deficiency. So that's what I live for, the nuances in natural health. And I think it's easy, especially with a protocol and with a book and with a reputation. People do not like going back on their word, because for some reason in today's world, when you change your mind, that sends a message out that you don't know what you're talking about, which it should be the absolute opposite. And people try to sneakily change their mind over a period of time, where I decided to just come out and say, hey, this is my new thoughts on cod liver oil or zinc or iron or ascorbic acid. And I think that's really the way that we should do things, especially people that are in the limelight and actually have a bigger audience. So even though that was a long show, I have a feeling I'll have Caitlyn back to dive into different aspects of iron deficiency. I'm sure as I research more, I'll have more questions, and so will you guys. Just such a important topic. And if you want to check out my work, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. I have my recommended products up there. I took down the CLF protocol temporarily as I'm rewriting it, and it's quite the job, because I'm taking out all the fear aspects to it, demonizing different supplements and putting more nuance and context in there, which is always a challenge when you write an article or create a protocol. There's just so much room for nuance and context that you have to build in, and you can only build in so much because it's really infinite. So I'm doing my best to do that with my CLF protocol. And most of it still applies, but I will be refining it and posting that soon. Product highlight from my website, the Analemma water wand. I had them on my podcast a few months ago, and I'm still using it. I currently use a copper drinking vessel just because it stays clean. I'm not trying to get copper from it. And my current water routine, as far as drinking, is I fill up the MRET pitcher that I bought over at Shen Blossom, and I run that for 30 minutes, and then I'll pour that into my copper bottle, and then I'll swirl the Analemma wand in there for maybe 20 seconds or so. And whenever there's sunlight here in North Idaho, I'll put the wand out on my deck under full sun and let it charge up, and then bring it in, wash it off, wipe it off, and put it back in its case. And I'm definitely noticing a difference from it still. Just the mouth feel, how the water feels in your mouth is different. It's really hard to describe. It's like smoother or denser or something. But it's a lot easier than vortexing. They definitely sold me on that. And I have a whole house water vortexer, so that's partly taken care of. But this is a lot easier and less electricity intensive, being fully off grid. I used to run the Duet Water Revitalizer that I bought from Bed Bath & Beyond for 30 minutes, but it's very loud, it's very obnoxious, and it's just a hassle to use, and it gets dirty in there often. Whereas the MRET pitcher plus the Analemma wand is just a really easy routine to maintain. And we definitely want to be doing something to the water. I think a lot of people just get it from their RO storage tank and then drink it directly from that. And that is not ideal. You definitely want to put the water through some sort of processing before it goes into your body. And my company is Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. Working hard to come out with some new products and upgrading the current ones. A lot of people are asking when the vitamin K2, purely K, will be back in stock. And I'm saying mid to late October. That's what I'm shooting for. But I'll update on social media when I can if that's going to be released sooner. And the beef liver is the newest product. I'm still enjoying that. I'm taking 6 capsules a day, usually with breakfast. And it's a really nice natural B complex source of all your B vitamins. And also with that little bit of copper in there, which I noticed an energy boost from. Recently, I experienced some digestive discomfort, and could have been the changing of weather. We recently had a ton of fires nearby, so it's been smoky for a week, and could have been stress with a lot more going on in life, but something was going on with my intestines, and I took the probiotic and endotoxin reducer, which I don't talk about often, from Mitolife, and that's an excellent first aid. Within hours, that really settled my stomach, and I felt so much better and less bloated. So that's a great one to keep in your medicine cabinet. If you're ever experiencing a change in bowel movements or digestion, or you feel more gassy or bloated, that's a really good one to try. And I'll take 2 capsules with a meal. Then last announcement, check out the Mitolife Academy. That's the private school that I host on YouTube. And for $15 a month, you get 2 private videos and 1 live Q&A the last day of every month. And that's if you want to keep up with my latest research, of which I'm constantly evolving and nonstop, relentlessly researching and questioning my own beliefs, questioning other people's protocols, questioning my own protocol, really putting all of the dots together. And I don't see many people out there doing that, aggressively researching and questioning things. And I love doing it. It's really fun, reading books, listening to lectures, and pretty much every week I'm ordering different books on nutrition. I just ordered 4 or 5 on Amazon about minerals, and if I happen to find one that's really good, then I'll share it in the Academy. So thanks for listening. I'll see you guys on next Friday's show, and stay supercharged.